going, I wanted to acknowledge the recusal of two of our members because they are party to the first discussion of the work session this afternoon, and they'll be joining us after the fact. So with that, our first item on the agenda is the Peak One Neighborhood AMI revision request. And I wanted to set up some expectations as we move forward through this, because we have 30 minutes to get through a lot of information. We've received your letter with the accompanying documentation. We received the staff report. Staff was here for questions and will not be presenting this afternoon. And with that, once you guys have completed your presentation, I'll ask you to take some seats over here so we can continue our discussion at the table. And again, we're on that 30-minute time frame, so that's yours.
Mr. Mayor.
That.
Thank you. I know there had been some discussion today, some questions about who has recused themselves in terms of council members from this discussion and who has not. So I wanted to take just a minute for the record to discuss what a conflict of interest is, what the law requires when you have a conflict of interest, and why it is that two members are conflicted on this issue and two members are not. We'll start with just a little bit of background on the proposition that state statutes make it a criminal act for any public official, such as a member of council, to act in their official capacity in a matter in which they have a conflict of interest. Town code contains similar restrictions in its code of ethics. Both state statute and town code define a conflict of interest as any matter in which a counselor has a financial interest, that is to say, in which the counselor stands to gain or lose financially based upon the decision made. In this instance, we have 4 council members who reside in the Peak One neighborhood under a restrictive covenant of one sort or another. And there are 2 very distinct sorts of covenants in that neighborhood. The first sort is what I will call the AMI restriction. I think we're all fairly well aware of it, but just for the record, the AMI restriction is a covenant that bases both the initial purchase price of the unit and, more importantly, for purposes of this discussion, the resale price at which a unit may be sold. It restricts it in a formulaic manner based on the lesser of a percentage increase or the AMI price, all of which will be discussed tonight. The point in all of this is that there is a second type of restriction, a non-AMI, what is generally referred to as a market rate restriction. That restriction places no limitations on the initial purchase price of the unit nor its resale price. The limitation is simply that the unit be purchased, owned, resided in by someone who is employed within the community, so the live-work restriction. The reason I give such detail on the restriction, the nature of the 2 restrictions, is that 2 of our counselors, Councilors Burley and Councilor Skripczak Adrian, have the AMI restriction that is being discussed tonight and would stand to gain financially depending on the decision made. The 2 other counselors, Mayor Pro Tem Inken and Councilor Helinko, have the non-AMI or the marketplace restriction and stand to neither benefit nor lose financially based on any decision that might be made based on the current request. So that is a long way around the bend on why 2 counselors have recused and 2 counselors have not. And I'm happy to answer any questions that this gives rise to. Thanks.
No questions, Thad. You good?
Good, thank you.
Perfect.
That brought up a lot of information that I would love the opportunity to discuss at some point, but we thought we were here at a work session where no decisions were going to be made, and you kept saying decisions. So we planned to just present what we think is a problem that's happening in Peak One at a work session. So there, I think we have a little bit of I guess I'm confused as to what the difference is between a work session where no decisions can be made
Well,
And an
under state, I use the term decision loosely. State statute requires when a person has a conflict of interest that they recuse themselves from the proceedings that concern the matter, whether those proceedings are discussion of the matter or a decision. So simply participating in the discussion of the matter where you have a conflict of interest is prohibited by the statute. So I did refer to decision making, but in a loose sense, the statute is broader.
So we're just here to bring up what is a problem, and I think everybody who is here, except for maybe Mark, is from the Pequot neighborhood.
Where's the ball for you?
And so we don't have 30 minutes to talk. We have a very short presentation just to present to you what we think is something that's a problem that needs further discussion.
Yes.
So Melissa, I think, is uniquely qualified to talk about the original vision of the Pequot neighborhood. She was very involved. And we all know that she worked with the neighborhood. She's been with the neighborhood since the beginning, was part of the development of this language. So she's going to address just this part that talks about the original vision of the Pequot neighborhood, for which the town won an award for that diversity.
All right, hey everyone, thank you for having us here today. As Missy pointed out, I think, and I just want to thank all the neighbors for showing up. We put a lot of thought into this and really been talking about it for almost a year or longer, some of us, and so this is a really important step for us. So thank you for having us tonight. As Missy said, so I was a member of the development team for many years. This vision document was our Bible. I was also chair of planning commission and I was on town council during build out. The vision of this neighborhood is why it looks the way that it looks today. We won an award from Housing Colorado for it. It's a great document and quite old at this point. It was originally written in 2009, but it was the foundation that gave town council the direction to enter into a development agreement, to transfer the land to a developer to build such an incredible neighborhood. And I think all of us would agree that the neighborhood is incredible and that we've loved living there, and there's no doubt about it. But what I'm afraid of is when I look at the conversation going on right now, all of our faces have changed. No, I no longer work for the development team. There's nobody sitting in this room besides, I think, Dan Fallon was actually present during visioning of this neighborhood. And so I think we need to revisit that. I think that we're getting away from what that vision was. And so, no, stay on this for a second. So I'm gonna break my 5 minutes. Just kidding. So I printed this out. I'm gonna leave this with you guys. I'm sure it's in the town files. You need to email it, but I really encourage you to look at it and read it, read the words. And some of the words in the very first page, the vision statement, it's all about striking a balance between value and cost. It was never envisioned as purely a low income, value engineered neighborhood. Never, and that's not how the homes were designed. It's not how they were built. Another bullet point, affordable housing means maintaining community diversity and vitality. Diversity was achieved in this neighborhood through a variety of income levels. Okay, we have families of all dimensions, all professions. We are a very diverse neighborhood, and this room sitting here, we've all lived there for approximately 10 years at this point. I've lived there going on 11, but that's kind of the time frame. We're not new residents, etc. And the last bullet that I pulled from the vision statement that was adopted by town council, an appropriate mix of building types creates diversity within the neighborhood and is more responsive for the needs of different kinds of residents. And so I mentioned the Colorado Housing Eagle Award, that's the highest award for housing in Colorado. I wrote the application for that. In that application, the premise of that was that we are a complete cross-section of the community. And so if you go to the next slide, we took great pride at the town and within the development that we are professionals, we are medical professionals, we're people that work at ski resorts, we're people that work within restaurants, business owners, for everything. And I think that that has been achieved by designating the AMI levels. And so when it was completed, and I didn't write down the year on this, but we had this celebratory memo that the town and we all put out together. And in there, I pulled this direct quote, a true cross section of our community in Frisco across many AMI categories. And at the time of completion, this was the AMI table. And so it was spread amongst, mostly 100, 120, 20% market homes, and then a very small number, 160, and then also a small number, 80. So it's kind of, you can see how they'll lay out now. So that's all I had to say, and I will pass it back to the center.
So this is the original development, and the colors represent the different AMI categories. You can see the diversity in the colors. This is with the AMI representation now. Every house is falling into the 110% AMI sale category. So the diversity's gone. It's not there. It's broken. It isn't what we had planned. That's what we're asking you guys to look at. How do we fix this? How do we get back into a diverse AMI category? I think that was pretty striking to see the difference between those two. So that's it. We're looking for your help. We're happy to be part of a conversation, but would love for you guys to look at it and see what you think, what kind of solutions we can come up with. How do we get back to that diversity and get it to a place where maybe more families can move out to let new families come in, instead of just making it a new neighborhood that is all 110. That's our presentation. Thank you, guys. We don't really have any more questions, just wanted to ask you to look at it further.
Can I ask before council gets in, just for staff clarification, I don't know if it would help you, the slide before, can you explain that second map?
Yeah.
How you came up with that?
So if you look at the sale price of all of the houses that aren't green, the greenhouses are market, so they're kind of taken out of this equation. If you add the 3%, which we're allowed under our covenant, under our deed restriction, you get to the 110. Because we can't use the AMI for sale, even though we can use it for rent, if we want to rent the house, and it's used for all kinds of other metrics. Adding 3% gets those houses to 110.
So that's based on the existing covenant, the original covenant.
The existing covenant.
What we're saying is we're, according to the current adopted 2023 AMI table, all of those homes,
It is.
and we're generalizing, and so
No, that's okay.
there
I just
might
wanted
be
to make
one
sure I
or
understood.
two that fall out, but I'm fairly confident that they wouldn't. They're all below grids, which so all of the AMIs are being pushed lower and lower and lower.
It's hard to know when to use the AMI and when not to use it. But this is based on 2023 numbers. Who knows what will happen next year, but the trend is that people in the county are making more for whatever reason.
Okay, thank you all.
Cool, thanks, you guys.
Yeah.
Let's start us off, Andy, sure. I can start. So today we are looking from this body to see if we want to continue this conversation. It's my understanding we're not debating, different levels and whatnot. We're not gonna get into the nitty-gritty that way. I've done a lot of homework in the last week and a half on this issue. And my stance is that really any policy that's been legislated by this body should at least be periodically reviewed to see whether or not it's fair, equitable, working or not. So because of that, there are sort of two camps here. And I do believe that I've heard enough that it warrants looking at this. I believe it's our duty to look at these things and determine whether or not they work. I'm not looking for sure right now for for an answer. And I understand, and please everyone be aware as well, we're a little short-handed. We have no housing coordinator at this point. We're working on it. And that's gonna take some hiring before we can really get into the that's where I'm at basically. I don't want to hinder for these types of programs. I don't want to hinder the possibility for lateral or upward mobility. And I personally think that these programs should be set up for that purpose. Is that we can, that our community members can take steps through the system to work their way out of Peak One. The sentiment at the moment from many in Peak One is that there's no way to work out of the situation. So that's basically it where I'm at. I want to continue the conversation.
Clarify question, if you don't mind. If there's a house that was originally purchased for 300,000, 10 years goes by, it now sells for 400,000, which is equal to the 100% AMI, which makes the math look like it did. But it's 160% AMI lot. Can somebody with 106 that qualifies at the 160 level buy a house at 100 AMI, 100% AMI pricing?
If the covenant says, so there's two different numbers in a lot of the Peak One covenants, so try to keep this condensed, but I don't want to give a generic answer when there's little discrepancy. The covenants, most covenants in the town of Frisco say 100%, let's say 100% AMI be the sale price, and 100% will be on the chart, the income for the eligible household. And you look at how many people and how many bedrooms, and you compare 100 and 100. The Peak One neighborhood has numerous covenants, which when people were originally qualifying for the initial sales, due to the development agreements, staff would sign off at the time and initial a higher eligible household income. So for example, 100% AMI unit had to sell at the number for the maximum 100% sales, but somebody was allowed to make up to 110% for their eligible household. And those are documented. We have to pull every covenant per property to find those numbers. If it is if they had struck it out and made eligible household 110%, we still have to allow 110% income qualify for that 100% unit house. In our new 2019 covenant that we encourage people to opt into, if they don't have an eligible household at 100% who qualifies in the first 30 days, it can go up 20%. And so you can broaden the income level of that house after 30 days. So far in the town, no one has gone past probably even a week of not finding a priority person not going under contract. Does that answer it? So yes, except there's exceptions.
But aren't the lots designated? Some are 160s.
Correct. So 160% property, you can make up to 160% AMI for that household.
Right.
And you could sell it up to the cost on the chart for for 160% AMI through the formula if you use the 2019
But if the person who owns the 160% AMI lot goes to sell it, they're capped. And it's now gonna sell at a price that is equal to 100% lot. What a 100% AMI person would qualify.
That's,
Yes.
yes.
exactly, and that's what peak one is saying, but it's
So
not.
the rule is,
Yeah.
what I'm trying to get a better understanding of. Okay, so now it's priced at 400,000, the reason AMI qualified person could buy it. But because it's 160% lot, as it's been colored, it's a purple lot or whatever the colors were. Somebody with a 120 or a 140 or a 160 could come along and
Correct.
buy it, right? Which means as those lots, even though they're all taking the color coding for what it was, they're all now priced at 100% level. There's still diversity in the neighborhood because some of the lots will only be allowed to be sold for somebody at 110, 100. Other of the lots, even though they're priced the same, some lots can be bought by a 160 person, some lots can't.
Correct,
Right.
yes, I see what you're saying, correct. As
Okay,
far as the eligible household, so if you have 160 per property, let's say that was
Yeah.
160. Anybody up to 160% AMI can purchase that.
Okay.
If it's 100%, only up to 100%, other than those variables. That they were
so
handwritten.
it's not like. I got it.
And I'm happy, I don't need to, if the covenant, if the council wants to see how to walk through the 2019 covenant, how we calculate the resale value. And how we look at capital improvements. I think there's been confusion about whether or not they're allowed, they are allowed, with a depreciation value, but I'm happy to go through that, but I just want you to ask me if you have questions.
To whoever deserves the credit. Meaning, I don't know, if you were here then, Dan was here, Melissa was part of this. Whoever allowed the change from the 2013 restriction to the 2019. Because if we were having this conversation in 2018. It's a very different conversation to me, because I don't think it was fair. I think a lot of wrongs were righted in 2019 through the modified deed restriction. So I think, you know, it was a well thought out neighborhood, a well thought out set of restrictions. I don't know if you're looking for. You know, I know what I'm thinking, and I really want to appreciate the conversation that we've had between letters, I've reached out to some of the people who wrote the letters to get a little clarification. I've looked into other towns, you know, whether it's Boulder and Park City or other places that do other deed restrictions, and through this conversation, I've become educated. Topic way more than I was, probably there's still room to go. But my ultimate thing is I'm very comfortable with the deed restriction as it's written. I gotta tell you, I think it strikes a balance between those who live there now, the capital improvements, the way they're allocated, and protecting the ability of the person who's not here yet, but looking forward to coming to Frisco, having the opportunity to be here. And the more I've learned, the more proud I am of the people who wrote these restrictions and modified them in 2018.
Thanks.
So, and again, I don't know how much detail we want to get into. I agree with Andrew. I think that the last several years have been an anomaly, right? The regular market has expanded like crazy. But I think that gives us more of a reason for maintaining affordable housing for people, because everything else has gotten so far out of reach. So I think that the current covenant allows for a reasonable amount of growth. It's the only time you can buy a house and be guaranteed any growth. And I think that there's a generous allowance for the improvements that are made to the house, not maintaining your house. That's just part of homeownership, but for the improvements that are made, those are taken into consideration too. So again, I have lots of notes. I don't know how detailed we want to get now, but.
I guess let me just, right, we have one request so far, right, and that is to continue to research this. as far as gathering more information from Andy. My take from this is, and I think this group, we've done really well over the last 3 years with head down. More, but we haven't answered the question of what is our goal with this housing in addition to filling it with folks that are going to work in our community? Is it for these programs, as we've seen, peak one, as we've seen that just in the last few months, year, we've seen folks go from duplexes to single family homes within the neighborhood. I've talked to folks in the neighborhood a bunch and friends up in Jackson who have similar restrictions on their home, and we've had, it's for greater understanding. That was very helpful. So for me, the question that is unanswered is, in addition to creating more housing for our workforce within the community in the 10-mile basin, is one of our goals to keep it affordable? That is unclear to me. I read the vision statement was a useful bit of information. I have talked to people who were part of the original in addition to Melissa just today. I spoke to someone who was very enlightening. I spoke to some other folks who are former housing folks who they had an opinion on what it was here for. And what the program was designed for. So the question from my perspective is affordability part of one of our goals. And I'm open to getting more information. I was hoping to not make a decision, but give maybe some different direction tonight. But I want to, so the question Andy has asked if we will look to get more information, and I think that conversation the 7 of us can have from a community visioning standpoint of what is our goal with this housing. So I guess my question for the group is, are we wanting to take no action, or are we wanting to answer? In my opinion, this is just one person's opinion. Do we want to answer that question? Is affordability part of our vision?
It's in everything we've ever written.
Just
I mean, I don't want to burden staff with coming up with an answer to a question that's in the strategic plan, the housing plan, and the needs assessment, and everything else is already said. We've got a 5A fund for this sole purpose of affordability. So I'm not sure, Rick, I actually understand the question of, sure, what would you be asking staff to come back with?
That's a good question.
yeah.
Okay, I don't want to interrupt, but I don't know
This
if
is an internal
we,
conversation.
Oh,
If
we can finish and then we can, yes, because
Yeah.
we said we would. So
I think before a decision is made, I think I would just like to clarify that something from our standpoint. Please, procedurally,
procedurally,
about the procedure that we're
okay,
a part of right now. You want me to go?
so yeah, go ahead.
So I think, by taking a very minimal approach tonight, we feel like this hasn't been given the due analysis and the due credit that it deserves. There's no public comment here tonight. You haven't heard from the 20 people sitting here. To us, that's not a thorough process. And so whether it be, we would love to stand up here and make a case for, answer the question that Andrew brought up about the 100% sales price to the 160% family. We would love to debate that with you all. We would love the chance to work with you on what is fair, right? What is affordable? Because we've got metrics that determine affordability right in front of us. So what's being used? So tonight we came here with the request to say, let's continue, we've offered one solution. There's 100 different ways, not probably 100, but there's a lot of ways that you can be creative. People have brought up ideas about first rates of refusal. They've talked about other ways to kind of measure this conversation. There's clearly an imbalance. But our hope tonight was that this would move forward, not go to a hearing per se, but give this, you know, this is our livelihoods. And so to kind of, this is a starting point, we hope, and that, I just want to make that clarification.
Good. Thank you, Melissa. Mine, go ahead.
On the affordability, like, you know, is affordability a priority? Yes, what's affordable? That's where that question comes in, because is affordability and fairness and equity talking AMI? Is maintaining under the AMI fair and equitable? These are things are what we have to discuss, I believe, you know, like, I think without it, we're guessing. But I mean, we are just guessing at this point. We can say the program works and all, but we are gonna be laying other deed restrictions on other projects coming up here. And the more we all understand for what and how it affects the people living in this community, the more, the better decision we can come to. And so with that, I'm gonna ask that we don't just table it again.
See, I think every time we have a housing conversation, we talk about affordability. One thing that we've done consistently every single time is whenever we talk about AM and all that stuff, is we never get to a prioritization of do we want this versus that because we need it all. So I don't actually, this is a conversation we should have about housing. I don't think we should have this about 69 units of particular housing that are already subject to a deed restriction. If we find that this form of deed restriction through conversation on future projects is not serving our community well, then we should act accordingly. But I don't think it's appropriate to burden staff with a conversation about a project that, and burden, I mean, it's a forever. If there's a proposal to put on the table, put the proposal on the table. But if the proposal is, let's talk about the affordability of housing in the town of Frisco, that will be a never-ending conversation, and we will never reach a result that is more appropriate, whether right or wrong, but more well thought out than what we are currently looking at the Peak One neighborhood, which is a very well thought out deed restriction that to varying levels of agreement is working extremely well or not. But we're not going to come up with anything better because it's all crystal ball vision. Some people are thinking through the crystal ball visioning from 2013, it didn't work so well. So in 2019, they adjusted. Personally, I'm not convinced that the 2019 version isn't working to change it that much. But to Andy's point, we should always be looking at this question. I just don't know if this is I'm not understanding this as the motivator to open up the door to saying, should we be changing the Peak One neighborhood deed restriction? As opposed to should we be looking at the affordability of housing in the town of Frisco? Two different questions.
Correct. That was the greater question. Yeah.
Okay. Well, we should always be talking about it because it's a product. We should always be talking about childcare. We should always be talking about safety. These are critical concerns of our community regardless. That's our job to continue to go with best practices on important topics.
Speaker at the top of the question.
And I will say, I think every one of us answers the phone and says hello whenever phone rings, or at least calls back. This is not, I don't think, the proper forum for a let's figure this out. That proper forum is at the coffee shop, one-on-ones, explaining to each council person, why is this a problem? No, but the problem, but there's not enough time to do that in a half-hour council session to be followed up, to be followed up, to be followed up. I would, if somebody went, sorry,
That's their point. Is that there's not enough time. We have not a lot of time.
and I think that time takes place outside of one-on-one conversations, constituent services.
But then it has to come back together and solidify into something with this body.
If there's a majority of council that is motivated to bring that topic up.
Yes, and that's what we're talking about.
And I'm saying it's not, I'm not convinced that it's council time to change, to do this analysis based on 69 units. Do we want to do it for the town? I think we constantly do, but we can always do it better. So I'm not saying I don't want,
Yeah, no, I understand,
I
but
don't want to see this on the agenda. We did that back in COVID. We had housing every week.
yeah,
I don't know.
and where did we get with that? That's like, this is where we spend a heck of a lot of time going around in circles without coming up with solid direction for some of this stuff. Yes, this was updated in 2019. It was updated because there was an issue. We have people in a neighborhood bringing forward an issue, saying that there's an issue, and for us to sit here right now and say, there's no issue, sorry, it is, we're not looking at all the evidence at this point. You know, we have gotten what we've each gotten over the last week and a half. And you know, it hasn't convinced me that we shouldn't be talking about it.
So
Whether or not
what does that
that is
look
for
like?
deed one or that is for our entire deed restriction, I think it's actually our blanket. It should apply to our blanket deed restriction, because anything we come up with, or if we decide to change or anything like that, is gonna go with our new deed restrictions that we're laying on stuff. So
what's the ask?
what's the ask?
What are we,
So what I'm hearing is that
what do you want to do?
people want to talk about the overarching deed restriction around the town.
Well, that's what Andy's saying. This particular group is asking for us to look at the deed restriction for their homes,
Right,
right? And so I think it should be an all-encompassing discussion. I think it should have to do with Peak Water. It should have to do with our upcoming deed restrictions as well. It's the same reason or why we were doing housing discussions 2 years ago. You know, and the thing is that all fell off only because we lost our housing coordinator and we had some changes. We did not have a town manager. We did not have a lot of systems in place at the time to get anywhere with that decision.
so are we gonna, so the presenters tonight, the Peak One neighborhood wants us to look at theirs. Do we want to look at the whole town as a greater conversation for this group? Is that the direction we want to?
I think it
We're not
could
gonna just-
incorporate the entire town. There's no reason why it can't, but it would affect their deed restriction.
Yes, it would, which is what I'm hearing from both of you is that's an acceptable outcome of this discussion tonight.
I'm not hearing that from Andy.
I don't know what it means. Okay,
To reevaluate, all of our deed restrictions to try and get them to a place to where my goal has always been to let's get one deed restriction for everybody. I know now we can't do that because people have to opt into it. But I think it's worth looking at what is better, if we can find something that's better and give people the option to opt into it.
but does that mean hiring consultants? What are you expecting staff to bring back as the result of the conversation to put on the table?
Well, I can tell you what I'm seeing around the county, and it's not what people are gonna wanna hear. It's capping it at 2%. And just calculating 2% in straight up,
That's a risk if we open the door.
Can I?
correct.
That's a risk.
So a couple of things and in my.
And we're running out of time, gang, just
Okay.
I'm gonna,
Okay, so it is possible that the system is broken.
Yep.
That doesn't necessarily mean that this is the broken piece. It could be the other pieces that are broken. We don't know that.
I think it's the whole thing.
Right.
Yeah.
I agree. I feel a little bit like this is, if a business has a lease. If they've signed their lease, the landlord has signed lease. And then all of a sudden the economy booms and the landlord comes to the business owner and says, you know what, I didn't know you were gonna make so much money this year. I have to raise your rent. Like the housing boom right now I don't feel like should affect this. Except that we need to maintain affordable housing. If we let these prices skyrocket, where is the affordability of that? I can't.
How is skyrocketing? How is skyrocketing following AMI? Like, how is following AMI skyrocketing? Sorry, that was the better way to
I think that first of all, what's being asked is not to just follow AMI, it's AMI or 3%, whichever is greater. So that means that 3% could go above AMI. Right, which means it's not affordable for that
put it. If
AMI.
that's what we ask at the moment.
I think that contracts were signed, that everybody knew what they were getting in for. This was not built to make a bunch of money on. It was created in order to keep it affordable. And I don't think that allowing possibly the first owners or second owners to get a big windfall when that's not going to maintain itself going forward. I'm not sure that that's fair.
And the question is what's, what's
What's fair?
windfall, what's affordable, what's, none of that we're gonna
Right.
answer at this moment. So to me, automatically, that says we have to keep talking about this, because otherwise we are in disagreement and we can't just be, and just decide that, well, that's where we are. We could, but I don't think we should, because I also don't think that that's what everybody's saying. I understand that's what you're saying.
Well, it's also, I want to parse through we should continue talking, because it's not like we haven't talked. I do want to be clear that whether it's you and I, all, with outside, with letter, there's been a lot of communication on this topic. So we're not saying I don't need to know anything. It's received a lot of information, so it's not.
Yeah, but the question then is it working or is it hindering the ability for, is it creating the position for our longtime locals to, like a corporate employee, work their butt off and then have to leave the county because there's no other option? And I know that there's been a few in Peak One that have moved up and laterally and whatnot, and I know some of us also, have moved up. But there is a contingent that is not on that
Cost of
plane.
living here has always been more expensive, right? You've always made the choice whether to pay the higher cost of living here in Summit County or go to someplace else where it's less expensive, right? I mean, I have some of the numbers of sales that have happened where, people have made $100,000 on their house. So then we're not talking about people losing money. We're talking about them not making money at the rate of market value homes, which is what was supposed to be expected when moving in this neighborhood.
We're also getting them all. You're not.
That's the distinction, is you, like Lisa, you seem to be coming across that AMI, following AMI values is going to be outrageously expensive. And
You're
the
right.
thing is that everything follows AMIs, and the AMI is not necessarily the right way to do these things as well.
Right.
But if we are gonna diminish people's AMIs, then the future people moving in, then that 100% keeps ticking down.
Nobody's moving in.
Well, nobody's gonna leave, is that bottom line. You're gonna end up staying for 25 years until you're forced to leave.
So let's
And
give Katie some direction, and we're gonna continue with this work session.
Yeah.
Is there, and I'm gonna look like for a yes or no, do you want to continue this conversation? And quite honestly, it probably continues after we hire a housing person. We can't put this on Katie. She's been here for a month.
Few months.
Right.
I'd like to see especially how it plays out over the long term.
Okay.
If there's a big bump right now, how that plays out over the long run, because I'm afraid of affecting future buyers. That's what I'm afraid of.
What's the question?
Are we willing to, are we wanting to continue the conversation in the future, probably after we hire a housing person, to really vet out all of our deed restrictions, including the peak one. And that's really what they're gonna be coming into these projects, looking at AMIs. It's not far off task. So I feel okay asking that position to look at those as a town. I'm hoping that we have relationships countywide, that we can look at a countywide deed restriction. I've had that conversation before. So we can all get on the same page. So that's,
I don't know what that means. I don't know what you tell me, okay, what you're hearing as far as what that would mean to you. Like, does that mean we come back in a number of months once the housing coordinator has got their feet on the ground and say, we're just gonna pick it up where we are now and figure out what's the scope of what we're looking for? Or are we thinking we're sending them out now charged with a duty, but we're being patient as far as when we come back with this?
I think we can get, Tom can give that person direction after we could talk to Tom on our one-on-ones is, what are we looking for? My goal is I'd like to have our housing person look at all of our deed restrictions, see which ones are still practical.
Yeah.
And which ones are not. And if they're not, if we have unpractical ones out there, give the town the option to get into one that makes sense in 2025, 24.
I mean, that sounds like, let's keep looking at the affordability of housing and the deed restrictions that we have in our community, and I would be happy to continue that conversation.
That's all what I'm proposing.
It sounds as if. Certainly looking at all the deed restrictions, understanding them, understanding whether turnover is happening and how that is happening with for sale units, because talking about. It seems like we're talking about for sale units here, the rental AMI restricted housing is a different animal somewhat. I mean, affordability is still a key, but. One of the things that we'd have to get to is what measures of success of those for sale deed restrictions is the council looking for?
Good question.
I don't have suggestions for you right now.
Right. I think that should be answered as well by this body.
What is the definition of success?
Yeah, what is the definition of success? What is the definition of affordability? What is fair now?
That was right, that's what I was trying to get to initially, right? Like, I'd like to have that vetted. And I think this housing person, we're not the only community doing it, right? We've got a whole county to look at. And like I said, we're probably not gonna like what we find, but it's worth looking at. Because times have changed. Everyone good?
I'm good with that.
Is that good with sense to you guys?
Yeah, I guess my one question is, it sounds like broader conversations on deed restrictions and affordable housing. Is part of the direction that analyze the resale calculation for existing covenants, or to not be looking at that portion?
Because the resale calculations now are on, right, they come out of the housing authority, if you will, they're.
It's going through a 2019 covenant or an different covenant, whatever is recorded on.
Right. Which,
And that's kind of the intent.
Some is
The
AMI, some is-
The Peak One neighborhoods question tonight is getting down to, does the council want staff's looking for direction, of are we also looking at analyzing resale calculations of existing companies?
yes,
What? Did that just burden you with hours and hours and hours? Or can
mean-
this be sequentials?
let's.
I have good connections with other communities in the county, and it would be a discussion, and it wouldn't come forward in a meeting, like within 2 weeks.
When we leave a meeting and 6 months later, you guys come back with a notebook and it's like, oh, we didn't have to do all that.
Yeah.
So if this is a sequential present this level
Yeah.
and then go from there. But I don't, that's why I just totally be protective of your time,
I appreciate that. But yeah,
not
I think that's what we
understanding.
want to do.
Sometimes you leave here and
Yeah.
I don't understand what we just asked you to do.
Well, and that's why just looking for clarification is that it's that part of it, and it's fine if it is, we're just asking. a question. But it sounds like that from you, yes.
I think it's the recount, this is the greater question here, and that's for all of them, right? I mean, when I talk to folks in South End, or, you know, we all saw what happened over at Over Mountain. From the county side of the house, a lot of it came down to that resale count. And how, right, how folks got to where they were, they couldn't even qualify for a mortgage. For the place they were qualified based on AMI, because of the resale count. So I think that's what I'd like. That new housing person to look at. I know it's a lot, and I appreciate Andy's, because staff time is huge.
Well, I think you can also give staff a little time to break it down into some chunks that might make sense, and we can discuss that with the mayor pro tem about how to bring that forward.
That's a pathway forward.
You guys are okay with it? I'm good.
It's good direction for us.
Okay. Item number 2.
Thank you, everyone, for attending.
Right, Jeff?
For me, it's not. Program that we're doing. Yep. No, you're welcome.
Yeah, the back. Yeah.
Oh,
So personally. Okay, Jesse, we are gonna have you here.
Absolutely.
we're gonna continue the work session once we get everything's.
Yeah. I think a lot of this. Yeah. Thanks. Oh, so you're right here. Thank you.
So you're. We'd like you to retire. And who like.
Yeah.
Ready to show.
Working. Well, with some, so he works.
Forward.
Whoa.
we'll put them to work.
Cool.
You're about 27 minutes over time. I just wanted to let you know.
No, I couldn't find.
I just like, yes. For us.
Yes.
She also did.
Yep. Hi, everybody. Stacy, we go. Cool. Let's do some quick introductions if that's okay. You guys want to go?
Absolutely. I'm Linda Burns, I'm the current executive director of Early Child Adoptions for a few more weeks. Well, and hours, not counting, but I'm the executive director. I have actually been there for 24 years, so it's almost 24 years. So I will be stepping aside and our newly appointed executive director is here with me. Catherine Schaff, current program.
At Early Child Adoptions, would we say 10 years?
Or
A little bit more, but 18 years in the field of early childhood education in Summit County.
Thanks for taking the job.
Yeah.
We think it'll be a nice smooth transition and thanks for having us here today.
Cool.
Oh, yeah, sure.
Maybe have.
Hey, Andy, nice to see you again.
Andy, Aaron,
Nice to see you
we're
again.
in, we're in council, Andrew. We agree. It's Andy on it.
I'm Stacey, I'm the town.
Jesse Burley, council member.
Lisa Holenko, Councilmember.
Ricky.
District Town Manager.
Cool.
Well, thanks for having us here. I think tell me if I'm wrong, but I think we're invited here primarily to talk a little bit about tuition assistance. But I think generally any kinds of early childhood childcare questions that we can answer, we'll be happy to do our best to address those as well. Our organization has been around since 1991. Some of you may not know that. And our scope has changed a lot over the years, but it is never, our mission has never really changed. Right up there to improve the quality, availability, and affordability of early childhood education in Summit County. Our agency actually manages quite a wide range of programs on behalf of children and families. Head Start and Early Head Start, a variety of quality initiatives, as well as tuition assistance, which is what we're mainly here to talk to you about today. But we actually have a pretty big scope of services. So tuition assistance, and our board, which Edward is just joining, yay, thank you very much. So our board of directors serves as the Early Childhood Council for the state of Colorado. And also our agency serves as a local coordinating organization for the state universal pre-K program, which is a mouthful, I know. We're kind of used to that in the early childhood world. So Summit County tuition assistance locally really fits into two categories. Summit Pre-K program is a Strong Future initiative that was passed by voters as part of a bigger Strong Future package back in 2018, rolled out in 2019. We provide tuition assistance and teacher supports for pre-K age children in the 2 years before children enter kindergarten. And then new this year is the First Steps program. And the First Steps program really is the next step of the Breckenridge and Frisco tuition assistance programs that you all have been supportive of. I think you've been in a couple of years. Yeah, a couple of years, I think. A couple of years in Breckenridge. That is now available countywide, thanks to the support of all the towns. Thank you very much, all of you. So now it's available countywide and managed at Early Childhood Options. It really serves children who are not yet age eligible for the Summit Pre-K program. So that would be 6 weeks to 3 years, funded by all the towns. All of you probably recently saw some agreements. I think we finally got them all approved and ready to go. And we've been accepting applications for several months now. Catherine's team. And we're onward to the first program year. We only have some very preliminary data today because we're still in the middle of processing applications. And even though school has started, most kids have made their move-ups, we're still in the middle of processing applications. So we will have much more concrete data after we've been through
some of that program here. So Catherine and team will be back with a program, with a report that really shares information, particularly about the town of Frisco and the 10-mile basement. First steps. Yeah, go for you. Sure. First steps managed by us at Early Childhood Options, and like Lucinda said, governed by the Child Care Tuition Assistance Board, and we meet monthly on that assistance board. We first had a work session or work sessions developed to initiate the program and then launch the program, and then now we'll transition to tuition assistance board. The tuition credits are awarded to families through our online application, similar to how they were for Town of Breckenridge and your Town of Frisco program through that SurveyMonkey Apply platform. And so we're trying to make it as easy and successful for parents and for us on our data side. We award the tuition credit saying they belong to a certain program, either being First Steps, SPK 3 or SPK 4, and then the percentage of the credit. Behind the scenes, we gather the rates and program agreements, or provider agreements, so that we know all of our licensed high quality childcare options are available. And then families accept their award and list their schedule out to us, and then we put it together on an invoice and kind of check through with each of our dedicated providers for that. And then through our systems, I believe through First Steps, we'll be sending that tuition credit on behalf of that family. So it doesn't go directly to families to pay their provider, we pay on behalf of that family. And that's kind of a behind the scenes, certified, safe, and secure platform that we send those that information along to them.
I want to back up with just one thing to clarify the difference between the Tuition Assistance Board and the Tuition Assistance Committee. We have a work group that's sort of an operations committee. Couple people there. But the board is actually made up of the town managers and the county manager.
Kind of breezed over, participants must be eligible for enrollment in a licensed quality rated childcare facility. We offer, I think we have 3 large buckets that we choose from for licensed quality rated childcare facilities. Those are licensed family home childcare, so someone who might offer childcare within their home. And then we have a small licensed childcare provider similar to Open Arms or Breck Montessori or Rocky Mountain Montessori. They serve under 30 children. Sually it's just 2 classrooms, or even that smaller childcare facility. And then our large childcare facilities. Summit County Preschool in Frisco, Wildflower Nature School, which is just about to open their doors. And then Lakeville. How many kids? 40 to 65 at the large site.
Is that the one in Silverthorne?
Yeah.
Got
Something, yeah, so Summit County Preschool, the new one in Silverthorne is called Wildflower Nature School. They are on the brink of opening their doors. They're pushing out enrollments right now, and families are kind of moving around the community. So we're really excited about that. But that'll provide 40 new childcare slots, and hoping to increase to 65 once they're fully staffed, which is amazing. And then we have Lake Dillon Preschool that's been operating for a bit in Dillon. And then our 3 large sites in Breckenridge, Little Red Schoolhouse, Timberline Learning Center, and then Cambridge House, all serving around that 65 to 70 families. I guess another additional childcare facility is the Breckenridge Ski Resort opened back up their childcare, and they prioritize Breckenridge Ski Resort employees, and I think they've partnered with another major employer in the town, but I can't verify that, just kind of heard through there. And they serve about 20 women. So we partner with all of them. For First Steps, the program year goes from September 1 to August 31 each year. Annual budgets and reports are provided to Child Care Tuition Assistance Board for review and approval. Eligibility requirements, age and enrollment. Age are specifically, like Lucinda kind of spoke about, with SPK 4, SPK 3. In deciding on that age eligibility, we worked down from age eligibility in kindergarten. We felt that was best practice for our program. So the cutoff date for age eligibility for kindergarten is 10/1. So moving back for SPK 4 must be 4 years old by deadline. SPK 3 must be 3 years old by deadline. And then everybody else that's younger than that falls into our first steps. And then they are in that program for the full program year and don't move within. So if they turn 3 within that year that they're in first steps, they'll remain in first steps until they're age eligible next program year for that SPK 3. For program requirements on working for families in first steps, at least one parent or guardian must work 30 hours in Summit County business. And in order to access full-time care, that's 4 days a week or more, both parents have to work 30 hours or more for a Summit County business. And then income requirements, well, I'll just say household income must be at or below 210,000 for the annual income. Previously, we used the marker of 180% AMI, and wow, AMI, a hot topic.
We don't dare bring that.
Not going there. But with our calculator that we worked on so vigorously, our goal is for families to be spending between 10 and 13% of their income on yearly income on childcare. So within our brackets of how you fit in your percentages, we saw that families earning up to an income of 210 can still receive a credit. Family of 4 at 180% AMI is just under that $200,000 annual income. So this gets those people that are in that little 210 bracket, that 10 to 15% credit, which, hey, a savings is a savings. And so I think it is helpful all across.
It's somewhat higher than 180, but
Definitely need to change some of our marketing for next year because I had put it out there on 180 AMI and then we figured out our calculator and I was like, well, let's just see who comes in and if we can award them, we'll award them. But definitely next year, kind of removing that AMI, but definitely, I guess in our annual report, it's going to focus on reporting AMI in brackets for like a wheel chart of percentage of people that we serve.
so you all will see what AMIs were served, but that isn't how we're putting it out in terms of the eligibility. So,
I wonder if you guys could speak to how that is slightly different than how we were previously doing that.
Then,
How we're doing it today.
yeah,
This is how-
yeah, well, we're using brackets, so the credits that families receive are based on a range of income range. They fall into a certain category, and if they fall into one category, they might get a 50% credit on their childcare tuition. In the past, what Breckenridge and Frisco was doing was really looking at each family application and coming down to a percentage of income. And that would determine the amount of their credit. It's a little bit more of a sliding scale with this approach. Although I think when you end up, we went and compared, they are going to end up being very different, but it's a lot easier to calculate. One thing.
But in big picture, the subsidy.
Absolutely, it's a sliding scale relative to a family income.
So that determination of the credits based on their growth, household income, childcare tuition rates. And then we look at that quality rating of the childcare program. We utilize the state Colorado Shines system for the quality rating. They start with basic level 1, which is just strict licensing. Level 2 gets into some professional development. And then levels 3 through 5 go through a rating system where someone comes in and brings, which our office helps in achieving that rating. And then of course that parent work schedule that I spoke about. And then if there's any other available funding sources, such as a Head Start program, Early Head Start, and CCAP. And then of course we spoke about UPK, but that's our 4-year-olds. You can kind of stack up. That's all. Questions for us? As of date today, for our First Steps program, we have 93 totally, that have accepted tuition credits across the community. We have 11 that have identified Frisco as their home physical address. Children's and families. And some have two. They might have 2 children under the age of 3. There's probably 2 or 3.
I'm sorry, what was the total number in the program?
93,
93.
That's for the younger children.
yeah, on the
Younger
first step.
age group.
That's first set. And what was the, and that is that less than 5,
0 to 3.
0.
And then program as a whole, we have 204. And so that'll include your SPK 3 and SPK 4, 0 to 5 ages across.
And then those children,
16 identified Frisco.
I'll just say that they're children versus families.
Families.
So that's good news.
Yeah, and we're still enrolling, so this is just a number, but it'll be higher.
And thank you guys for adjusting the eligibility requirement that you just reviewed, right? Because I've heard, and what I'm curious about is, are you spending all the money you're getting? Because I'd like to see you spend it all.
Yeah, I think
Yeah.
that is the hope. We're taking away at putting together the invoice. It's a lot of work behind the scenes of making sure you have the correct rates and correct schedules, confirming that, and then kind of seeing what you spent. I anticipate some movements happening, some people that have been hiding per se, say, hey, how come I didn't get this? So some additional applicants coming through the board. And then I would say, you know, end of September, really looking at those numbers and making sure we're spending. If we have to adjust credits, you know, to spend more, I think everybody would be happy about that. But I want to look and forecast to make sure that we're being responsible.
It's funny you would ask that question. We have that conversation regularly in our office. Well, you know, it's tricky this year. We have a couple of new programs coming online, so that will increase, and they aren't actually in this count yet because they aren't actually online yet. So that will increase the numbers the total numbers. We have some programs that are still under enrolled due to staffing, but as soon as their staffing gets up, there'll be more numbers. So I think, you know, our total enrollment is a little bit lower than I would have anticipated at the moment. I think that I expect that will increase, but even so, I anticipate, I won't be here for it, but I anticipate that the group will be coming back to the board, to the Child Care Tuition Assistance Board with a recommendation that the levels of assistance increase a bit. In order to spend down the money and just help families. We have seen in several years, and I think Brecken Frisco can, the staff there can confirm this. We have certainly seen salaries increase, family salaries increase. But we have also seen cost of everything increase, including childcare. So, and we want childcare to increase because we want the childcare tuition to be equal to what it takes to pay their staff money to keep staff. So, you know, so it's a little bit of the chicken and egg, but I expect that we'll want to increase the level of assistance. If not by next year, maybe before.
And I would imagine that as the managers look at it on a basis, they see fund balances growing at the bottom. They're gonna be asking exactly the same question.
Exactly. Well, and you know, we made a prediction and it was a little educated guess on what we thought the budget would be. If we're way under, we have to take a look at why that is. So.
What are you hearing from the facilities about staffing where, you know, even if they're all fully staffed, we still don't have enough, but that's been the conversation the last couple of years, so is it better?
It's interesting, the pandemic really took a hit, you know,
Right.
everybody took a hit during the pandemic, but childcare centers particularly did. In staffing, in terms of staffing and being able to keep rooms open, and it's recovering. Certainly it's a lot better than it was at this time last year. Much better. It was much more of a crisis last year.
Would you have
But-
year over year kind of, how many more slots aside from Wildflower? Aside from Wildflower, the new facility, year over year, are you seeing more slots because they have more staff?
Yeah, we don't have that data now, but we do have the capacity to collect that data, so it's a good note maybe to make a point of that. The programs individually have that year over year, but really what's happened is almost every center right now is enrolled by some amount. Some are more than others, but it is due to sufficient staffing. So it's getting better. Most of our programs are at least staffed enough to keep all their classrooms open.
So
Not
adding,
100%, but we're getting there.
adding capacity isn't the current problem. It's a future problem.
So capacity is a tricky question right now. Adding capacity is definitely a problem when it comes to infants. Our numbers are not going to be very large when we report out on how many infants and toddlers receive tuition assistance, because we just don't have that many places slots in the community. So we definitely need more infant toddler slots, whether that happens in the context of a large childcare center like Summit County Preschool or Wildflower, or in smaller kinds of programs. You know, that still needs to be determined. But that's one issue. When it comes to the pre-K, capacity is not the issue. Staffing is certainly an issue, but capacity is not the issue. We do have slots for almost all of our 4-year-olds, most of our 3-year-olds. So we're getting there. The challenge is most at childcare centers, like Summit County Preschool, you know, their financial model really relies on having those preschool slots available, because you can staff them at different ratios. You don't have to have quite so much equipment. You know, it's just infant toddler programs are more expensive. So you rely on having the income from the preschool to offset the cost of the infant toddler program. So to make all that work, we might need to rethink how we subsidize some of the childcare programming. But that is down the road, definitely. I do know that the county commissioners are interested in really some long-term strategic planning for capacity and what will be needed down the road. So I'm sure, I would suspect all the towns would be involved, would be interested in that as well.
Any other questions, gang?
I'm just curious how, if at all, and I'll just use this term because that's what I'm reading in the paper, whether it's true or not, the debacle around the state program has impacted our program, and what we're doing to potentially mitigate that.
Well,
That was my word. I used that word, but throwing it out there.
yeah, so it's been interesting to be involved in that at a statewide level. Here for us in Summit County, we're very fortunate that we've had that SBK program in place for a few years. So we will not have any children that lose out on funding. We are, I would say, part of the debacle at the state has been, and I'm using your word, part of it has really been that controversy over how many children would actually get extended hours. We have 154-year-olds who, 147 4-year-olds who receive the basic 15-hour school year program for free. And that is, I think that is good. And that's actually a big success on our part, because we have really almost 100% uptake on the part of the providers being willing to participate. That is not true statewide. So we're in good shape. The school district had to scramble a little bit due to some changes that happened with some of this stuff, but honestly, we worked with them and we worked with the SBK program, and no child was losing out on any kind of funding. So that part is great. It has been confusing. I do think we still have families out there that think they applied for Summit Pre-K or First Steps and actually applied for UPK and don't know that they still have another step. So we're waiting to hear from those families. So it has been kind of confusing, and the messaging, unfortunately, from the state has also been a bit problematic. So that's part of the reason we see the paper all over. But I feel fortunate. Once again, we're just so fortunate that we have a community that has some things in place already, so that we can. This is what I tell the school district. We just have to roll with it this year, and we'll have it all dialed in by next year. So I think we're actually in really good shape. But 144-year-olds getting it's 15 hours a week for 9 months a year is not something to sneeze at. That's a big change. So, and the other big change from the UPK program from the state perspective, which we love in Summit County because it's what we've been doing for a long time, is they're really embracing what they call the mixed delivery approach, which means you can receive pre-K in your childcare program, where you can have access to full day, full year care, And you can receive those pre-K subsidies, or you can also receive it in the school district preschool program, where you might still have to think about before and after school care, but you're in a good program. And, you know, I think that's the way everybody in the country should go. So that's what we've been doing in Summit County. So really pleased that the state has adopted that approach. It hasn't been as smooth as everybody would like. Us, we're doing okay. The state contracts with different organizations throughout the state, throughout the state to help them coordinate at the local level, and we're that coordinating organization here. So I think we, staff have a pretty good handle on it and feeling okay about that.
Cool. Thank you guys very much.
We do wish our governor would think about his language a little bit sometimes. Sometimes it comes out a little different than I'm sure what he meant to say, so.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Enjoy retirement.
Good luck. Thanks, you guys.
Thank you. Well, I'm not moving or anything, so I'll still see all of you around, so.
Next up on our agenda is going to be our proposed amendments to the PDU. So, I always say.
Skip out. So I need to wait for. I actually feel like I'm scheduling appointments because I can't see any of the people. I'm like, I can't find which one to do. You're good. Oh, there you go. It's a lot. It's true. It's true.
We are on mic at the moment. You just start.
Yeah, you give me 4 times.
Yes.
Going after Jeff's record.
Is that the record? What is the record?
Every once in a while, he's got this and then that, and the other, and something that you've got to do first.
Oh, God, this one is my favorite one. It's what I know.
Lisa, Dawn texted me.
But
She wants me to tell you that your
Yeah.
phone is at shopping cart. I left the store.
That's the
without my
root.
phone. Yeah.
It is.
But I was like,
And everyone-
that's impressive.
Thank you.
This is kind of good, doesn't it? No, I had a little bit of anxiety.
So she was thinking birthday yesterday. And I had more like an invite. Trying to
You are ready? Right in. She's not gonna be wrong. So it's a kind of refresher. This is before you, in the follow-up, to the June 27th council meeting, we had an item that we had a proposal from an applicant who discussed kind of a really good intent of a plan that had some creative workforce housing plan for it, but it wouldn't comply with code. And we were expecting that was been kind of an ongoing problem that we've seen over the last few months or few years, really. So staff solution is to propose these amendments to the plan unit development overlay district. So my intent tonight is to kind of do a very brief background to make sure you're all aware of what the planned unit development overlay district is. Then I want to hop into a few specific questions which are revolving around what staff is proposing, so you know what we're proposing exactly. And I think you could have some modifications for us, so I just kind of want to get some input from you. And then with that, we'll take your direction and we'll bring it back in theory for a reading at a future meeting. Recognizing the time constraint tonight, I will run through kind of fast, but since obviously it's a work session, I want to hear your comments and discussion, so please just interrupt. Briefly, because we have a really packed planning commission meeting in early September. We went ahead and had them provide a recommendation on the PUD modifications and offer recommendations to the council last Thursday night. They recommended the council consider, you're not voting tonight, this is obviously a little ahead of schedule, but they gave the recommendations with a few discussion items to consider, and that's what I'll be bringing up throughout the slideshow tonight. So very basic, what is a PUD? It's an overlay district. So you look at a zone map and you have your central core, you have your residential high, you have every zone district by colors. Overlay district is a rezoning to a specific new set of regulations that goes on top of that underlying zone. So if the underlying zone requires a certain density and that overlay PUD document does not state a change in density, then that underlying zone district still applies. So it's not superseding all of the underlying zone districts, it's on top of it, and it's only for what the town allows flexibility in for that development. The code today allows PUD be a minimum of about 1/4 of an acre. Staff is proposing to keep that size the same. So in order for an applicant to come forward and have a proposal to rezone a parcel of land or parcels of land that are connected to a PUD, it can't be a very tiny lot. It has to be a minimum of 0.24 acres, and we're proposing to keep that the same. What we are trying to also do is, it's a little bit unclear in the existing regulations. PUD should have a plan, so a basic sketch plan of development. Here's where roads, if there's roads, here's our access, here's our units, here's where we're gonna cluster, things like that, here's our parking. It also should have a narrative, and a lot of times historically, narratives have been missing or not really clear, and staff has trouble interpreting those. Though that narrative is what's saying what is different than that underlying zone district. So an applicant would come before the town and they'd say, here's our plan development concept plan, and here's the narrative. We're asking for a difference in density, we're asking for a difference in the side setback. And as a result, we're offering you a community benefit. Now weighs that community benefit with allowing flexibility in a planned unit development. So that's kind of the basics. It does always follow the rezoning process. We're not looking to change that at all. So if somebody came in with a PUD, goes to planning commission for recommendation, town council always has the final decision on a rezoning request. So why would you rezone to a PUD? Potential scenario for you is, let's say you have an applicant who wanted to build market rate and affordable housing on the property. But they found that in order to allow their financing to work, they could use more density, they needed a reduction in parking, and maybe they needed a side setback. This is hypothetical. The council may find, and the town may find, that they really like this project that's gonna bring affordable housing units into the town in this area where they think it would work, and the reduction in parking set could be ideal. So that's when you look at these. The advantage of a PUD right now, instead of proposing the town council consider a modification to zone districts in general, is it's a case by case basis. So that way you're not looking at increased density for central core just to get in certain projects, things like that, which is why we're going forward with a PUD overview. So our intent and what we hope you are finding, and we're looking for feedback on, is we wanted the town to continue to encourage creative developments that propose workforce housing and the community benefit, while also allowing other community benefits that may be proposed. Those could include things such as open. Historically around the country and in the town of Briscoe, people have looked at PUDs as this is to cluster housing to protect open space, to provide a home, to provide a playground, things like that. We're looking at it with more of a newer trend and a community need of housing. However, we didn't want to remove open space because there could be a scenario where it is ideal to protect open space through a PUD in the town. Workforce housing is a discussion I'm gonna come up, so I want to know, I wrote this. And it's in the same presentation I gave to planning commission, they're gonna suggest you consider affordable housing per definition, not workforce housing. And so I'm just gonna note, I put in here our staff's intent when we wrote this with workforce housing. The intent the council may find affordable. So more of a stricter AMI.
Do we have those two things defined right now in our code?
Yes,
You're getting that.
and I put them on here in case you needed them. But I don't know if they're on there, since they're a newer rezoning or new. I already went over why you would do this instead of an underlying zone district, so I'm gonna skip that slide. Okay, so why we're proposing kind of to look at the PUD regulations is at least since 2015, we have had applicants come in wanting to do a PUD. We read them the code and they find out that the code requires a 30-foot perimeter setback. So no development can occur within 30 feet of all boundaries of that development area. And we also require a 55% usable open space. That has sent every potential applicant away and not coming forward. For good or for bad, it's just not conducive to the smaller properties that are vacant in the town of Frisco today. I will note there's obviously a bunch of PUDs that have been historically approved, and they're the larger subdivisions such as the Reserve, Frisco Park, plenty of them, but the last at least since 2015, when those big parcels of land have been developed. We haven't seen anybody be able to use these regulations. So they've kind of been sitting there, but not conducive to what we have available in the town currently. So getting into the actual proposed modifications in the code, two sections of the code are applicable. The first one is 180-2.4.2. This section goes through basically the rezoning process, and we're not proposing very many modifications. You saw in your packet, we just did it by track changes. We're trying to clean it up. We really want to be clear that a concept plan and narrative would be required. And one thing I did want to note is we proposed a little bit of a modification to minor changes. So we are proposing minor changes allowed, but not be required to return to town council if there is an increase or decrease of units by 10% from the original approval. Now, we wanted to add decrease because if you approved affordable workforce housing and all of a sudden a developer decided to not build 5 of those units, it used to just say increase, but we think it should come back to council if they're proposing to reduce what their benefit is also. Planning commission had a really great comment, and staff is going to go ahead and do this. I don't think council would have any concern. We wrote units. Technically, by definition, a deed restricted unit is not a unit of density. And so there could be confusion in the future of an applicant saying, well, I'm not reducing my units because it's not a unit. And that's more of a terminology discrepancy, but staff recognizes a good point. Planning commissioner, and we think it's worth being really clear. We mean any kind of affordable residential dwelling space or commercial space. If there's any concerns with what we're proposing as far as less than 10%, it would just go to the community development department to administratively approve. So I want to make sure council is okay with that proposed change, that you would see continue to stay in here and that you didn't feel the need to have it come back through planning commission council for a smaller change. Okay, so that was it for the 4.2 that I really, or 2.4 that I really wanted to point out. Yes.
That's what the impact is of adding the word parking to 2.4.2.b.1.
Yes, and I can pull it up also. Oh, yes. Right now, we didn't specifically state, great question, that parking is allowed to have flexibility. So in the current PUD regulations, you probably couldn't request a reduction in parking. We're proposing in 4.3, and so confirming in 2.4.2 that an applicant could request a reduction in parking for the development.
It's just part of the subjective review of.
Correct. It's always going to be a case by case. You are not, the council in town would not be required to approve it if somebody has a plan. dealt with,
Previously, because it wasn't there, did they have to comply with the parking code?
right? Yeah, great question. And happy to take, that's again why we wanted this to be a work session. We didn't want to just bring just to you, because we're happy to take.
Knowing how contentious parking is, that a planning commission discussion at all?
They didn't comment at all on that. I think they, which I would take to mean they supported allowing a parking reduction for certain projects.
I think the has gone around a few times about the issue.
That's what I mean.
Yeah.
Well, especially if this planning commission hasn't seen a PUD, but but if the hands are tied by the code.
This allows you to consider it.
What I'm doing at the moment, I don't know where I land, so.
Okay, so 4.3 is the actual kind of regulations for a PUD overlay district. This is where those 55% open space requirement and those 30-foot perimeter setbacks level. So we wanted to be really clear because this should always be a standard in PUD language and it is not in our town code very well right now. That just a simple statement isn't proposed to be in there where a PUD does not address a specific development standard or requirement, the town code shall apply. So we wanted to be really clear that if it's not in that narrative, they don't get that exception in the future for that development. So this is just a general term that should be in all PUD code language that we just don't have right now for some reason. Just clarification. So next one, which is going to be a topic of discussion tonight, provide some feedback to staff. Staff had in the PUD language right now, you could allow uses, propose uses for that property that are not necessarily allowed in the code for that underlying zone district. Staff removed that clause saying that you had to follow permitted and conditional uses for the underlying zone district. Staff's thinking was primarily, is it too much for the town to have to analyze a specific use for a property when that town has already determined that it may not be appropriate for that area? Planning commissioners really they discussed this for a while last week. They felt that it should, any applicant should be able to propose any use within a PUD. Staff is not completely opposed to this. That had some comments when we discussed this before planning commission that you're not legally allowed to have a variance for a use, and therefore why would we allow flexibility to a use in a PUD? It is done in other jurisdictions and we've had it in ours now. So I wanted to see what you thought. There's some extreme examples, which I could give one extreme example, right? Our side of things, drive-through is not allowed on Main Street. Someone proposes the drive-through. Then the town council feel confident that they're okay with someone proposing that and analyzing it for that site and seeing yes or no. Very less extreme, we've been talking a lot about childcare, not allowed today in essential core by right or by permitted use. Planning commission used that as a great example of why can't someone propose a PUD and have childcare with an underlying district of central core, then the town doesn't need to rezone the central core if you wanted childcare by right or by conditional use. The PUD, if they're doing a PUD, could be an option. So very realistic example right there.
What, just practically speaking, like if staff's recommendation was not to allow it, you know, what, I guess, what is staff making that decision on, and does that feel too subjective? Could it open us up to challenges, I guess?
And that was kind of staff's thought. Like, that's why we felt following the underlying zone district made the most sense and why we proposed it. I had, quite honestly, I'd gone and written it, and then when the attorney reviewed it, he's like, I really appreciate you took this out. I never really was supportive of this in there, and I expressed that to former staff, but they kept it in. However, unless the town attorney says absolutely no, I do see it is a PUD, you're not allowed, you get to review it on a case by case, and there could be uses that the town feels could be ideal for that development that aren't allowed, and do you want to say no? So staff still likes the idea of keeping it to underlying zone district, but we would definitely take your recommendation if it's to allow flexibility of uses, and we would make that modification.
Are the uses that can be allowed defined by the uses that are already in the code? Can it be made, or, if somebody says, I want to build a housing community that's the best thing in the world, but I want to put my mother's dress shop in there. Say, that sounds great. Who doesn't want to, who doesn't think that's a good idea? Well, is that dress shop a dress shop, or is that dress shop a retail
It
facility
would be a
that can
retail,
be then utilized for any purpose?
correct, it would be a retail facility.
Okay.
And any use that's not defined in the code can always apply for a conditional use. That doesn't mean something that's defined can. So like childcare that the planning commission had was a great discussion point, which I wanted to bring up to you. Or the town considers looking at what they really think is ideal for his own district and asking staff to allow that use.
Wait, can you say that again? So childcare facility that is defined in the code elsewhere.
Correct.
Can't come in and apply for a conditional use because they're already defined. But something that's not defined in the code could come in and make their case.
You got it.
That's what you're saying.
That's based on the current just
Okay.
code language in 180.
Yes. Behooves you to not be defined.
Application.
I can say I prefer it out, only because use variances don't exist. If the zoning is provided, we don't want that thing there. It should be not tied to, it should be, do we want that thing there, or giving the inappropriate use because you've given us a swing set for your building.
Yeah.
I'd rather make it harder for that, that use, that's my.
But just because it's allowed to be considered doesn't mean it has to be yes.
It just comes in a different package. Like,
Well,
do
because-
we want retail on Frisco Street? Well, the general answer would probably be no. But hey, I'm gonna put in 10 workforce units and a swing set. Then I use swing sets anymore. Yeah. It's a different package. I don't know. You're asking.
I lean more towards allowing for the option to consider it. Because I just feel like so many times in our code, we've tried to make things as black and white as possible, and it's precluded development. It has precluded creativity, and it hasn't contemplated future things that we don't know about, and it's just kind of kept the community. I mean, the intent is to try and protect that vision of our community, but I think I think it leaves out the creativity. And if we can still say no and do that, perhaps there's some subjectivity to this whole thing, like what is community benefit and what do we value? What's the give and trade in that negotiation? But I just feel like we've been too many times we've had projects, PUD or not, where we just have been like, oh, the code says no. And that's what we do. We just say no. So to me, I'd like to at least be able to consider it.
So I think I missed where that is on this, because I'm just curious, if we say yes to something and then we say no to something, like, does that open us up for lawsuit?
But would you want to weigh in on that one?
Give me some more context, please. Say yes to something and then say no to something. You
To
mean,
something else.
If
On-
you had if you had two like PUD applications that had a,
there's, with due respect, there's no such thing as two like PUD applications unless it's on the same property, right? Different properties, different issues, different impacts. The one thing I would say in addressing this conversation is that nothing in our code prevents a development applicant from seeking a PUD and a rezoning to allow a new or conditional a permitted or conditional use in the underlying zone district at the same time. The only question is the decisional criteria that the code currently sets up for each of those decisions. And as Councillor Aronson has noted, the conditions for approval of a PUD aren't really focused on the same issues as the conditions of approval for a rezoning, right? The rezoning looks at the comprehensive plan and the consistency with adjacent uses. The PUD looks at, did they bring a pony along with the swing set? Right? It is more of a, for lack of a better word, a horse trading affair. And a horse trading affair is probably not the best place to decide where an appropriate land use is. So that's my take on it. It's why I recommended against it when it was added to our code, which is only by way of the recent Unified Development Code amendments. Prior to that, there was no use variances, for lack of a better term, in the PUD code.
And so this is rectifying that situation.
Yes, it is taking the different approach and rectifying its kind of policy lead. But for the reasons I just expressed, most places keep them as two different decisions, though I'd acknowledge there are PUD codes out there that allow use variances. They are the exception, not the rule.
I'm in support of your language that way. I actually had a business that was affected by exactly that. The Copper Mountain, Suffolk County decided to call me a manufacturing facility, and I was not zoned for that. So I ended up working out how I was defined, but straight away, the answer was no. Without the ability to say, well, you want a little hand furniture maker in your space, or no. And so the answer was yes, we do want that, but we need to define it in a different way is kind of how that all ended up coming down. But so you make the ability to make your case. And
No,
that's
I
what
appreciate
PUD
that
is about.
example. That helps. Yeah.
Okay, so I think I'm hearing at least 3 would like the language that was in the packet modified to allow uses. Or did I-
Yeah, so you are on the right track with where you're at.
We're planning commission for that.
Yes, I think so.
Okay.
Planning commission is recommending something different than staff.
Which staff is okay with.
But staff was recommending that you have to keep those restrictions in there and you can't, right?
Correct.
Right, so
Right.
yes, yeah. This is
Staff was recommending you cannot get a change of use.
Correct.
PUD, planning commission
right,
went contrary to staff.
right, which is where that is. That is with planning commission, right?
No,
No,
that was-
So,
you-
I'm with Katie.
well,
Do you think there should be language allowing for use change?
yes,
Yeah, which is where.
so that's where we're at.
Yes.
I'm with planning commission, which is where I thought where that was, but I misunderstood that, I
That's
guess.
okay.
So,
Yeah, make it clear, no, make it clear for you, because it's gotta make sense.
I'm saying we either have a horse trading show or,
Which is what a PUD is.
right. Or the conditional.
The underlying zone, either the underlying zone district, whatever is already been decided by the town. That's it for uses allowed, or you allow
Well,
something in proposing,
Or the conditional use process, Katie, right? Staff
Right.
can,
yes.
the planning director, you can make a determination, subject to appeal, of course, that some proposed use is substantially similar to a permitted use and should be allowed, with or without conditions.
If it's not defined already.
Correct. So there is that process.
Okay.
So in favor of flexibility there to be able to, that's what you're asking, right?
I'm in favor of this.
I don't know what's wrong with it.
Okay, so I will go with modify it based on the planning commission. And that's what will come before you. I mean, you're not voting on it today, but we want to bring it to you, hopefully in a manner that you are ready to support it and approve it in hearing. Their goal, so, great.
Mayor's gonna have a completely.
All right, this brings into what Thad just mentioned.
You have to voice it.
Correct, yes. So just kind of what for you to be aware of, standards for all rezonings. For PUDs, the town is always gonna make sure they align with the community plan. You're always gonna ensure they strive to complement surrounding area. And the other one, I believe abbreviated here, so I'll explain. Any other overlay district shall be met. So an example would be, you have historic overlay district, you have a few scattered parcels that have been rezoned in the past or historic overlay. They cannot ask for flexibility from that historic overlay requirements that they haven't been able to. We don't see that really being a beauty, but this is kind of to cover the basis and to ensure that. So all PUDs that come forward to the town, these are the 3 standards that will be looked at for all of them. Twist, which I'm gonna get into now, is now picture 2 tracks underneath PUD. A track where your community benefit is housing and a track where your community benefit is going to be open space. We feel like they are very different and we want to encourage both. So we are giving additional standards for review for housing and then different standards for the criteria for open space. And I'm breaking this down really clearly because the planning commission had to make that clear and it led to a lot longer conversation. So what I'm going to move into right now is the affordable housing track. Okay, so affordable or workforce housing community benefits. If and PUD developer is proposing the community benefit to be along the lines of affordable or workforce housing. The language proposed before you in the packet was a minimum of 25% of housing units in that development shall be restricted. Now, they could propose more. They could propose different ratios past that. But there would be a minimum threshold required for any PUD proposing the community benefit of housing to be a minimum 25%. So the discussion point for you is that what is in your packet today was going off of more of a light restriction. That was kind of drafted off of the conversation at the June meeting, where we were looking at it as workforce housing and live work units. The occupancy was written in there for majority of income within Summit County. Your sole residence in the town, meaning you can't have another primary residence someplace else, your sole residence. No lease less than 6 months and no short-term rentals in the unit is what we had drafted. Planning Commission discussed the occupancy restrictions. They recommend council go with a strict affordable housing definition with an AMI cap, resale value cap, and that would be 25%. And they also discussed, they don't have a set opinion, but they wanted you to think about potentially a few of the planning commissioners felt like there should be a 12-month lease requirement. Staff necessarily is not supportive of that because we do see a lot of questions from such as our traveling medical field groups within Summit County, and they are not here for 12 months and they are looking for affordable housing to reside their employees in in-house. So staff kind of would promote the normal 6 months, but planning commission did want the town council to discuss 12-month leases. They didn't say please change it, they just said please discuss. As far as the affordable versus workforce, obviously looking for feedback if the council would happy with what was in the packet, or if they would like to really require the AMI cap the language. Not maybe the best conversation for this meeting after the previous one. But while it's all fresh in your head, work session, affordable, and again, these are things that are only the bare minimum of what we want to require. So in full disclosure, this is basically bringing in for a PUD only an inclusionary zoning requirement. And it's a way to bring in that requirement without looking at the entire county, but it's only as a negotiation piece for a PUD. Workforce affordable.
Oh, can I ask a question just to clarify? So the minimum of 25% of the housing units shall be restricted. And they will, that 25% would be restricted to affordable.
Depending on the direction we receive.
Or 25% of the 25%.
Oh, sorry, 25% of total units. So if I propose, let's say 100 units because the math is easy. Then 25 units had to meet that restriction. It is in the PUD language, and that's where we're looking for feedback tonight, as far as the light restriction we proposed, or to go straight.
If we're not delineating between affordable and workforce, but we have to. I mean, I guess affordable is the fair way to term that. I don't know about the applying the more stringent restrictions as the baseline. That's my.
Oh, yeah, I see what you're saying. That's another way of saying kind of what I was gonna say, and that is, I would favor the workforce housing partly because it aligns with housing helps, like, and partly because of the discussion we just heard, that there's not, we don't have the stepping stones of the higher AMIs, and so why would we choose to automatically limit that straight out of the gate?
Yeah, that's a good way to say.
I mean, a deed restriction light is still a deed restriction and it's still a housing unit that is in perpetuity. And that is the goal of our housing program.
Yeah.
You know, we want a range, we want stepping stones, and right now, every time that we put a cap on it, we are preserving housing stock for lower income people, but it's precluding the rest. It's precluding people from leaving those units and going into other ones. So if this would help, get 180 to 210 AMI, great, we need those units too. So I'm in favor of workforce.
Any,
Consistent with housing.
I like what Jesse just said. That makes a lot of sense to me.
thank you. Okay, these are your definitions in the code. I won't read them. I won't have you read them. I
Go back for one
Yeah.
second. I'm sorry.
no, you.
I gotta give her space. She wanted every morning.
I feel like I said too much in the last one, and so is the object of affordable workforce housing to get people into market value homes?
No, it's to continue to bring, right now, no buyers can move on. So no new people can come into those units. And in order to move them along, everybody needs to move along in a spectrum. It doesn't, you can't just pick one person or one household and say, this is all about you. It's a spectrum of options. And right now we have a huge gap. And there's no turnover. There's absolutely no turnover. And that's a problem.
In a similar version, our transportation plan. And we are missing multiple levels of our transportation plan in order to provide or force people to drive less. We want people to walk more, we want people to ride their bikes and all, but we are missing so many levels of our transportation plan that everybody's just gonna drive, or they're gonna walk or exercise, and that's how it ends up being. And so we end up pigeonholing ourselves into one place without having the spectrum there.
Yeah, I mean, I just think my perception of our housing program is that people can live and work in this community, and if only 100 people can do that ever, and they can't move on, then we're not serving a continuum of workforce. We're not, everyone is always going to stay where they are. And I don't see why we would start right out of the gate with the, like you said, with the absolute most restriction here. Not trying to move away from the conversation you guys all had earlier. Like, why would we pigeonhole ourselves right out of the gate when the whole intent of a PUD is to have a negotiation? That's all I'm saying. And so give yourself the higher of the two and let's negotiate. And if the public benefit is not being met at the time we consider a PUD, we can still say no, or go to the developer and say, we really actually want 100% AMI units. right?
Right.
So I think there's an opportunity to have that discussion about the needs at the time, as opposed to just saying like, no, we need to restrict these units
That makes sense.
for all.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah.
Great. And I'm not gonna go through the definitions, we put them in here, more newer information in the code for one of the recent amendments, so it's new to me also. Okay, so that, moving on from that affordable housing community benefit, we're over in the other area, which is someone's proposing a PUD with an open space community benefit. We are proposing to leave in basically what was already in the code, which was that 55% usable open space, 30-foot perimeter setbacks, 35-foot maximum height. The planning, now I want to note 35-foot maximum height is not always maximum height, so that could be more restrictive than the underlying zone district. And that's how it is in the code right now. I want you to be aware. We toyed with the idea of just having it, you meet the underlying zone district, you don't ask for flexibility in height, but you can meet that. We brought it back to meet the existing code language in the PUD. Just the kind of consistency and for talking. So. Planning Commission did have mixed thoughts regarding the 30-foot perimeter setbacks. They felt that that should be something that should be asked for at the PUD, and it could be a very good example would be next to one. If you're doing an old school kind of classic cluster development, you may want to put it 5 feet from a setback, and depending on what's next to that property line, it may be okay to put houses 5 feet from the property line. We shouldn't require 30-foot perimeter setbacks. So the Planning Commission is overall recommending the council consider us taking up that requirement for perimeter setbacks and just allowing an applicant to ask for flexibility from the underlying setbacks, which it just kind of trying to determine how do you still have some rigidness to your open space request and not just give away everything.
Right, but you had called it out with like the only properties that would have fit the PUD before were like parks.
I'm
And so with
struggling to
that-
find a lot that the benefit would be open.
Right, and so with, 30-foot setbacks on a, say, a property, I'll just use like the Richmonds.
Mhm.
And it doesn't allow you to build, right?
And it wouldn't
A
be,
quarter of an acre is that, and that would stop a quarter of an acre from taken out of a PUD.
if it was for an open space community benefit, different requirements than if the community benefit was housing.
Was the intent for that to create open space in 30-foot setbacks? Like, is that the reason?
I
can't for the life of me
why we
figure out why
I
that
did
makes
staff, we never understood that.
Okay. Because to me,
Um,
I'm like, okay, well, maybe you're creating a buffer that is considered open space and you're moving density apart. But you're just,
That just, I mean.
okay, that,
Usually you see that as a result of the trade-off, right? When the PUD code is focused on encouraging open space, it is also encouraging clustering. And what you don't want is to cluster things tighter than they would be and then move them against the property line. And so I think that's the idea of it is it's to address the natural tendency to push everything up against an edge to create the open space you need on the other side to accomplish the PUD.
that's exactly the kind of open space that you want, is a contiguous body of open space and not like 30-foot.
Oh,
Like,
agreed. Agreed. But a
Yeah.
PUD that is based on 55% open space just is not made for small lot development. Period. I mean, it's not what it's there for. It doesn't lend itself to it and it wasn't intended to.
Well, small lot development would not use the.
Would use the
space.
housing,
They would use the housing.
You can, that's what you're saying, okay, just.
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay, you can choose to go just the housing.
Yeah.
tract.
If you go to the housing track, you do not have a 30-foot perimeter.
Okay.
However, that is not opposed at all to having us to have people follow the underlying zone district and request flexibility. And the council or town could ask for a larger setback if they feel it's warranted during the PUD process. You don't have to require it up. So I think to speed this up a little, I think you would. What I'm hearing and what Deb is also completely okay with is that we go ahead and we allow flexibility to these items. They're not going to be requirements necessarily for an open space tract. All right, I'm not gonna review this unless you want me to. What we just, our standard when we bring forward a rezoning is to make sure we're referencing a community plan, to just prepping you for what's gonna come forward, how we feel like these do meet the community plan, and these were your staff report. Oops, sorry about that. Probably should put that on my presentation. So just as a refresher to you, when you consider a proposed amendment, when it comes before you to vote on, we want to make sure it's consistent with the master plan and other town policies. You want to ensure it does not conflict with other provisions of the chapter code necessary to address the demonstrated community need. By doing this, this is saying by telling staff to move forward and bring you PUD modifications, you agree it is compliant with these items. It's necessary to respond to a substantial change in conditions and or policy in the community, and also it's consistent with the general purpose and intent of the chapter. We do find this, but just wanted to bring it up.
So is there an opportunity for somebody to come in with a PUD to meet a community need that is not housing?
It's big enough that you can, and it would
Okay.
always have to meet those standards, the community plan, adjacent properties, being pretty much in sync with the uses.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, so it's not worth specifying community need of those two things,
We could look
because
at
that's
it.
more restrictive and in the nature of being more flexible.
Yes, and it was definitely written to keep it open other communities. We put just a generic language. To know that. With that, that is it for you. Sounds like we're on the right track to take it forward.
Here, yes.
Thank you. Yeah.
But a question more general is, do we have a provision requiring notice to adjoining or neighbors within X number of feet of a PUD application?
For adjacent properties, I will double check the code. I believe we do, and I think it's a standard 300-foot notice. But I want to verify with you. I will say, if somebody modifies a PUD, some of the original PUDs say you have to have written approval from everybody in the PUD, and people just can't get that. So we're not, also, there's some old things we'd like to get out of some PUDs to come more into current code regulations, and we can't because they can't get out. So we are proposing modifications. We don't need everybody's. But as far as notification, yes, I will make sure it's in there.
By definition, we're allowing somebody to use the land in a way that's different than what their neighbor expected them to do. So just want to make sure that
Yeah.
the neighbor gets a seat at the table.
I will make sure that that is a code.
That is correct. It flows through the requirement that you follow the rezoning process, the procedural requirements, which then take in that notice.
And that's notice like a letter
To
or just you
adjacent-
have to
to
publish it
adjacent.
in a newspaper?
No, it's actual letter notice to adjacent property owners and then posting the property as well.
We do those in a postcard. Do that. All right, if you're okay, I'm gonna end this because I know we are behind schedule and we have one more still.
So again, thank you,
Yes.
phenomenal job, because like, let me tell you, this is like you came in and you identified a policy that was broken. And you took it upon yourself to repair that policy.
This is what's fun to me. So thank you for letting me bring this forward. This is how I used to work. It's great.
My challenge to figure out restrictions on.
Well, everyone's good, we're going to dinner, I mean, it's just the way it's gonna be. With these guys, we just cut it into
Dinner's not.
25.
whatever it gets.
It is, we are 5 minutes. I will not do an introduction like I was going to do for them. I'm just gonna.
So the credit, if that's something, consider you guys need.
You can say. Sitting.
But
Oh. And I can do that. We give you an illustration. Would you rather sit up here?
Can't look. into
I'm
the-
happy to. have you sit up here too.
no, that's all. If I can squeeze, they would take that, pull this chair there down.
Very well.
That work? That work?
Okay, well, it makes sense for Adam to be up here. Yes. Yeah.
Right?
Oh, yeah.
You know me.
That works. Work permits. So there. Yeah, you I'm worried. Cut out the. Are we all mic and everything? Okay. Yeah, so, but. Gotcha. I don't know if it was here last time, but I didn't import all the fonts were like gibberish all over the slide.
Last year to understand that. Okay.
Hi.
Waiting on Andy real quick, and if Andy didn't say, we're just gonna jump right in to respect your guys' time.
They all saw my.
SE Group, it's bringing Adam from the Forest Service. And Ash will take us through the status of the backyard.
Hello. I know it's late, so we get through this. It is. Very good. It is a school night.
They have hours.
Well, it's been a year since I've been here to give an update. My last update was July of last year. And so I wanted to come, and there's been a few things, regulatory things that have changed with the Frisco Backyard Project. We've gone through a public scoping period that's really influenced how we're moving forward. And I wanted to provide you updates to that. You also saw in your packet, there is a contract amendment associated with some of these things that I'll talk about towards the end. I have slides, but I'd love for you guys to ask me questions if you have any. Adam Bianchi here from the Dillon Ranger District Ranger is going to chime in because I'm Ash from SE Group and we work for the town of Frisco, but we are actually developing the analysis on behalf of the Forest Service. So it's a really important distinction. So let me start here that I have to use the scrolly wheel. Okay, so our contract, SE Group, we were awarded the contract in early 2022. So our contracting date started in March of 2022. And we were retained to assist the Forest Service with their National Environmental Policy Act review. So any project on, say, federal lands is one of the conditions the federal government's required to adhere to a NEPA procedure, and that is what I do. So the contract that we bid on, the proposal that we submitted and it ultimately went under contract for was for $240,500. And we had not yet interfaced with the Forest Service. We developed our costs based on some preliminary internal town designs. At this point, there was an assumption of about 230 acres of fuels treatments as part of the Frisco Backyard and Trails project, really concentrating along that boundary of Forest Service and town of Frisco land.
And I want to jump in and say, I really appreciate you doing all the extra work for that job.
Oh, yeah, thanks.
You know,
Yeah. Okay, guys. Okay, so backtracking a little bit to last summer. Adam and I both came and we presented to council where we were at that point. So that 230 acres of preliminary proposal went to the forest. And they took that and they did some initial screening to see, is that a feasible proposal that we could consider bringing through NEPA? And one of those screenings was a some fuel modeling, fire behavior modeling to say, okay, what does this area in the Frisco backyard currently look like? We ran it through these models, high level models, what would we expect in terms of fire behavior? And then with that 230 acres, kind of looking at it and saying, is this gonna make a difference? And a few things came up from that is, we wanna make sure we're doing work that does make a difference. And that 230 acres really didn't address some of those key concerns. Those key concerns being Miners Creek Road, which you notice the picture up there, that's the one we had flashed up a year ago. Kind of has that green triangular sort of, instead of being the boundary against Forest Service and Town of Frisco lands, it's now that kind of downward triangle that follows Miners Creek Road. And that's really deliberate because Miners Creek Road is a higher emission potential. You've got, it's open for public vehicular access. We know that that's a constant issue to deal with legal campsites. So you have that combined with, as we know, large swaths of pine, mountain pine beetle, dead and downs, put those two together. And we were looking at that as being one of the reasons for extension. So that area expanded treatment to 1,250 acres. We came, discussed that with town council in July. The other thing is looking at the trails, working with Pete, looking at the redundancies in the trail systems, looking at how we can improve circulation and use in that area. It really added complexity to this project. So we said at the time, we're gonna need a fee adjustment at some point. We worked within the contract amount that we had, but the money started going in different places. And so now we're at the point where we have a better idea of what's necessary, so we can actually come to you with a map forward of what we feel going to need to complete this process. Okay, so what's something unexpected that happened last year? Camp Hale, Continental Divide National Monument, super under wraps. Knew something was going on a little bit because there was some people who were super busy. But that was really something that was held closely in President Biden's office, and he declared that national monument October 12th, 2022. And it's about 54,000 acres. And it includes just about the entirety of the Frisco Backyard Project area. So now not only is it on National Forest System lands, it is now within a national monument. Now, I do have experience working in projects like this. I have projects on the Sequoia National Forest that all overlap partially into the Sequoia National Monument. Eventually, there will be a monument management plan, but we're not at that point yet. It's too early in this process. But this area was designated very specifically for its historic and spiritual significance. And that's important about some of the things that we're going to have to do in order to make sure that we are in conformance with this proclamation. All right.
Thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome.
Yeah, it was all his idea, sure. So, I mean, it could have gone either way. To the very last moment, it was like, what's going to be part of it? I mean, they made the decision at his desk that day. I had no idea which way it was going to turn. So, not his desk. All right, so we had the monument designation in October, kind of had to pump the brakes a little bit to see with the Washington office, make sure, you know, they were looking at things pretty closely. I don't want to overstep, but.
Yeah, we've been working on this project, so it was something that as the president was working through the proclamation, you know, the White House and Council for Environmental Quality, which is our overarching, gives us our guidelines from a new perspective. You know, they were asking the questions about all the projects we have in essentially the 10-mile range. Obviously, this was a big project that we had coming down the line. So they were very familiar with what was on the table in the proposal. And I think that's reflected in the proclamation that specifically states and outlines that forest management and fuels reduction work for protection of property in towns, you know, shall be continue to be allowed through there. And so we are using the proclamation as our current management guideline along with our forest plan until the proclamation or until the we get through the monument plan. And so we still feel confident that this project aligns well with the intent of the proclamation.
So
we got the green light that this matches, the proclamation language was thought of specifically with this project, which is awesome. Does add a little layer of complexity, right? A little bit of national attention, a little bit more for the public in this particular community now that we have a national monument. So we got through that process, continued to do project revisions and pulled together a proposal that we sent out for scoping in April. And many of you may have come, there was a public meeting on May 2nd at the Day Lodge. Technically, the sign-in sheet says 32 individuals signed in, but definitely got people who did not sign in, who would not sign in. So we know attendance was higher. If you were there, it definitely felt pretty busy. So I think that that is a very, very low number. So during that, it's a 30-day public scoping period. This is something that's in the regulations. We do things in a very specific order because that's the way the regulations say we do it. And that ended on May 15th. And as part of that, we sent out, did like the legal notice and we did public meeting. We sent out emails with a packet. We also made a story map for this project too. This is a really complex project. There's a lot going on. It's good that we're looking at fuels and recreation together because they're so interrelated. But it does add complexity with that. So a story map, if you haven't been to it yet, it's going to be great. I have it like saved on my favorites bar because it'll guide you through, show the maps, allow you to click on things, change stuff. So it's a great way to describe a complex project. So during that public comment period, just let you know, there are some things I'm allowed to talk about and some things that I'm not as part of the NEPA process. So I'm very careful with that, but all of the public comments are available on the Forest Service website that is public. So you can go on in their public comment reading room and look at it. So all of this stuff is stuff you would know if you sliced and diced all of those comments. We received 64 unique submittals. So that's just not counting like duplicate form letters. And then we go through this really exhaustive process of reading those letters and teasing out what we consider the comments out of them. People aren't professional comment writers. So there's a little bit of, nuance to it, but we would say we got 209 that are called substantive. So that means they said something that was specific, either had a specific concern on a resource or provided data or information. They weren't just an opinion or a conjecture. They didn't just say, I don't like it. They actually said, I'm concerned about this or that. If you took those 209 individual comments and broke them into resource categories, the vast majority had to do with alternatives. So people either saying that they, in some cases, supported the alternative and why, maybe they disagreed with an alternative and wanted to modify it. Maybe they came up with entirely different suggestions the Forest Service should consider. The next largest group of comments was focused on the purpose and need for the project. So this had to do with some people disagreed that there was even a need for projects of this kind, either recreation or fuels. Or perhaps they said that we needed to include some clarification or we needed to modify it more to reflect this or that. That's a lot actually in those two categories. So to see people really kind of thinking at that level. Recreation, it only shows 16, but I would say because the alternatives had to do with recreation and the purpose and need had to do with recreation, those 16 were really specific on you should study the effects to this particular recreation element. So those were the top three. And if you took all those together, the real common themes that came to us that seemed to be the public's greatest concerns were concerns about maintaining a high quality recreation experience in the backyard. So people, that's a very subjective value. People have different ideas what that means to them, but the common thread there was they wanted the Frisco backyard to remain a high quality recreation area. And then the other thing that we heard through were people, and this is kind of in that alternatives and that purpose and need of consideration of a low intensity treatment method or approach, saying we would like to see either particular low intensity treatments, methodology, equipment, spatial scale, things like that. But those were the two big ones. No big surprises
In other
there.
words, don't clear cutting. That's their big concern.
Yeah, that was one of the things we definitely heard. You want to add to any of that?
Yeah, I mean, there was quite a spectrum. I would say, we had everything from the process to climate, scenery, hydrology, body concerns. So there was a spattering of concerns. But yes, most things centered around the forest health and fuels piece of it with recreation that are embedded in the alternatives and the purpose of need. And a lot of we started off this project because it was in the national monument. You'll recall, I think we first came to you, what was in the monument. There's a process that through the National Monument Policy Act that we get to combine basically a scoping in the comment period to just one opportunity for the public to comment. And the purpose of that is to be more efficient and timely. Because it was in the monument, we decided to split those out to allow more public engagement. So with that, I think there's a little bit of, we kind of saw maybe some confusion on the process. Because I think people are used to being able to comment on a pretty fleshed out project that we say exactly how we're going to cut it, where we're going to cut it, what it's going to look like, where is the trail going to be moved to. But because we split those processes out, it was pretty broad and not very specific. And so what I think that drove much of what we saw on the alternative comments and the purpose and need, but it also made it look like there's a giant blob on the map that looks like, wait, you're going to clear cut everything from, Zach stop all the way to the CDNST, that's the vision, right? But that's not the intent. The intent here is to say, like, we want to do work in this general vicinity. Tell us what you think, right? And so I think there's
They told us what they thought.
but I think that led to some misconception as well. That led to that comment of we want to see less intense, because I think this comes off when we first saw it. People think, oh, that's pretty intense. That's a large area that's going to be without trees. And I don't, I think that's just a misconception that due to the process, that and the broad and less specificity that led to some of that comments, I would say.
Yeah, so based on the vegetation type that's there, each of those kind of colors, these are newer maps, these are interim maps, so they do show a few tweaks since things went out for public comment, but we do know what's possible, and there was a list of in these different colors, like there could be 4 or 5 possible treatments in there, but unfortunately, the thinking from the public was you're going to clear cut that whole thing. It's like, well, there's more nuance. There's different pockets of different growth, and there's just a lot of different things that go into getting to the design step. So yes, it was broad. We got the feedback. We're going to respond to that feedback between now and the next opportunity for public involvement, which is when we release the draft environmental assessment. So right now we're in the alternatives development stage. And one of the things that we had in our initial contract for what appeared at the time to be a fairly straightforward project was have a no action alternative and a proposed action alternative. For an environmental assessment, you don't have to do a no action alternative, but we thought that would be very storytelling for the public. Based on the types of comments that we received, we are going to develop a third full robust alternative that incorporates very specifically some of the suggestions or correction that we were getting to kind of show the math. What we were getting from the public is show the math of why you think that. We don't think that's necessary. So, we think this is sufficient, and we're going to analyze an alternative to be able to compare those two. And that's the spirit of NEPA. And so that's what we're gonna do. Okay.
That's for the first.
Yep, that's part of the price tag. All right. So I might have gotten a little happy with some arrow flow chart, but thinking about the implications of the national monument and this public comment period, kind of like we identified the need for something. So now what does that mean for our contract amendment? So we identified the need for more public involvement opportunities. Now we need to change our NEPA review process to provide those. That means more documents go out for review. We process those comments. it's a more prolonged timeframe. We heard the need for fuels treatment details. So now we need to go out and collect more data and refine that proposed action to be able to provide those fuels details. We heard the need to consider the public comments suggesting other alternatives, so we're adding a third action alternative. And then with the national monument and that question for people saying, show me that my idea won't make just as much difference, we need to add quantitative data collection and analyses there to really show that work. Okay, so now we're transitioning over to the contract amendment overview. Any questions about the NEPA process or scoping comments or anything like that? No? Okay, so this is the very first time we've come back for more money. We have not since our initial contract award in March of 2022. A few things that we're asking to change in our contract. First is that period of performance. The initial period of performance was 20 months. We need a year after that is what we're estimating right now, considering that prolonged NEPA process, the national monument pause, et cetera. We also do need the fees associated with that change in the environmental review process, the comments we're going to need to process, respond to extra deliverables. And then we did, after our July meeting a year ago, did move forward to, we're nearly done with the field work for that additional 1,000 acres. So we've captured that field work with a little bit remaining, which we'll speak to, and a contract amendment will help bring that into scope. And then we've already talked developing that third alternative for detailed analysis and more refinement of that proposed action. So some new things, some brand new things that we didn't have before. We now have a new report and section that's going to, I titled it specially designated areas, is what we've used in similar situations where we need to show compliance with the proclamation and under each of the alternatives. We've also heard from the public about climate change. They wanted, if we're going to go in and do fuels treatments and recreation improvements, how can we consider the effects of climate change when we're designing those? Think forward and not just think about the right now. Conversely, how are our alternatives going to then be affected by or affect climate change? So we brought climate change analysis in. I want to talk about the.
Yes, we brought in the Northern Institute of Applied Climate Science and then the Rocky Mountain Research Station for the U.S. Forest Service to work with us to go back, kind of take a step back, go over the proposed action and kind of go back through to help us kind of form that third alternative with the eyes of climate impacts. So kind of taking a step back and looking at what the current climate science says, what we have proposed, and how to make a project more resilient to future climate considerations. So, there's different ways you can look at it. It's like, we're just gonna continue to do this work in time and hope for the best, or you can, try to be a little proactive, think forward. And we may not have all the answers, but if we think that we are, for example, trying to manage for the most diversity of tree species within that area, and no matter what happens with climate in the future, there'll be certain trees that will do better species and others may not do as well. But we know if we always are striving for the amount of diversity in there, that we will keep the backyard in a place that is forested landscape, for instance, right? So how do we accomplish that? Or, hey, the recreational experience, we heard a lot about winter season and the impacts to harvesting on snow conditions on trails. So let's think about what that may be in the future with different climate perspectives and snow. Maybe we want to be able to put some of these trails in shaded areas outside of our treatments in areas that will hold more snow to allow for that recreational experience later in the season, for instance, right? So those are those conversations we've been working through. We've had two kind of full day meetings with the research station and Northern Institute to kind of help us think differently.
On your dime.
Yeah,
by the way. I did put in here for myself to participate and my, one of my teammates, but they all did that on the Forest Service side and funded that. And then the benefits and the knowledge of that gets kind of brought into this project.
yeah, so that was a couple days of all of our specialist biologists, foresters, hydrologists coming together to look at it in different lenses. It's really cool. Yeah.
So yeah, so how can we continue to provide that positive recreation experience in the future of having more? How can we consider more use if that shoulder season and that summer use season continues? What are we going to see in visitation pattern changes? What are we going to see in around Rainbow Lake? And are people going to be seeking out shade? Are you going to end up finding erosional areas in areas closer to trees because they want it? That's where they want to sit. And so we were really brought through this process, and it was fascinating. You'll learn more when the draft DA is released. A couple of other things: robust recreation analysis. I think that's pretty self-explanatory, but the project has gotten larger than what we initially thought, more complex, and then we have a lot more attention and a request to analyze specific indicators. We had originally assumed we could have a combined scenery recreation analysis. Now we're going to have to pull those apart, and we believe that including visual simulations, a picture is worth 1,000 words in our community. So we plan on doing simulations from various points within the community. Think on the story map sliding bar, so they can really kind of see what are these treatments going to look like. There's did kick around, we could even do them in the future. It looks like now, what would it be simulated in 5 years? That sort of thing. So we really feel like that'll have a lot of value to the community. And then lastly, this, I have to flip to it because I wrote a whole bunch of notes I wanted to make sure to touch on this. The LiDAR and high resolution orthophotography. It's a whole bunch of words. So we included a brand new task in there for flying a drone, capturing LiDAR, and taking high resolution pictures. And the reason for that is one of the driving factors when we start thinking about it is how can we get the amount of quantifiable data over this 1,300 acre area to be able to do the models, show the math the public wants to see, and these various thinning, like if you only take out this much fuels versus this much fuels, how can we compare that in a way that's defensible and would allow Adam to make a decision? Also, that requires more field work, more intensive stand exams, et cetera. If we fly a drone and collect that data, we'll be able to get a lot of that information without having to constantly go back out in the field. I have a few other big selling points on this one I get really excited about. If we end up having to pivot because of another public involvement opportunity, or we need to have another consideration in the middle of winter, we aren't just on hold until we can go out and collect new data. We've got some that we can continue to work with. It will collect information about we can identify just about all of those social trails that are out there and provide that data back to the town of Frisco instead of sending someone out with the GPS and trying to capture where those trails are. It allows for us to map with 2.5 centimeter accuracy you have high quality fins out there. Those are irreplaceable wetlands. They're considered like prehistoric. So we can do better confidence on siting trails where fins, wetlands, streams are without having to send people out and actually doing so much of that flagging work. National monument stuff.
Yeah, the historical resources out there. So, that's a big part of me making sure that we're meeting the intent of the proclamation. And so there's a lot, especially from mining history out there. And so this would help us from a heritage collection piece to identify a lot of those historic properties that we need to protect underneath the monument. It helps our archaeologists hone in on certain locations and areas as they ground truth it and have through consultation with the State Historical Preservation Office. So that will help there. I guess we'll wait on that.
Yeah. And so what we see is it not only does it give us more data to be more defensible in the decision and compare those alternatives, but looking longer term, not having to spend as much time on field work, having data really readily available at our fingertips, and being able to be more nimble for some unknowns. We don't have a monument plan yet. This is a brand new monument. It's based on historic resources. There's a ton of historic resources. And so this will help us move forward with confidence and be able to,
And the other piece is the typical process. What we do is it may be, when it comes to the forest health and fuels pieces, under a typical another project, it may not be completely a farm. It's still a little rough around the edges, I guess, of exactly where the treatments are going to be, and that's purposeful to allow us time to lay those boundaries and those units out before, as we're putting them under contract. That's usually done after a decision is made. But we heard a lot about wanting that specificity now and understanding exactly where treatment's going to be. The LiDAR would help us where we would be able to get to that level of specification without having to do it later during implementation or prior to implementation from the contract side. You could essentially feel a high level of confidence that we could do much of that layout via computer versus somebody with a GPS that's physically walking, following the state boundaries.
and then lastly, it does allow us to monitor over time. So we can see the success of certain, if we talk about recreation trail experience, we'd be able to monitor what was the original linear feet or miles of shaded trail versus after treatments, how much is now shaded and then how much recovers. And we would be able to tell the public, well, yeah, we may have cleared and the trails went through this much. And then within 5 years, it's gone to what we would expect to recover to a certain level. So there's a lot of confidence. You can rely on the data and build confidence with the public in addressing it. Okay, so I did want to put in a slide about how Adam and I have been looking for opportunities to cost share. And Adam, you spoke to what's the one earlier, the climate change, which I didn't even put on there. That was a good one. And then a few other things that I was able to avoid having to put into this. We've got cultural.
Yeah, so cultural's a big one. I think typically in the original ask that we would do is kind of our kind of a level 1 analysis, which is more of like a desktop analysis on historic properties. Being now that it being in a monument, I feel strongly that we need to know exactly where all those heritage important pieces are located to help me make a decision. Where before, I think in a level of confidence, you could say under a desktop exercise based off of past information that we've collected, we know where those historic objects are. So I feel pretty confident that prior to making a decision, we need to have a pretty good survey completed on the cultural resources within the project area. And so for that reason, I know it's a bit of a change, I think the Forest Service can continue to own that. And so, the Forest Service will hold that piece of it and all of the cultural resource and and writing and through consultation with the State Historical Preservation Office. So that's just one piece of it. We were originally trying to think of a contract and some funding for the Forest Service, but at the end of the day, I think we're moving around some projects for Forest Service archaeologists to be able to complete the work before the snow flies.
So a little bit of, if I can riff on that a little bit for some nuance, is State Historic Preservation Office, he mentioned, must issue a concurrence in order for a decision for Forest Service to be issued. And so they're kind of like a gatekeeper. If we don't get concurrence from SHPO, which is one of our many acronyms, we'd have to go back to the drawing board. And so with this being a new national monument that was designed specifically for historical significance, and then you've got all the mining stuff out there, it's a really, there's a lot of artifacts, and those artifacts could include a pile of cans, but the regulations, federal regulations require that those be documented and then describe why they are not considered eligible for inclusion in the National Register of Historic Places. So no matter what, it's a high labor intensive area to go out and survey. And when we were first kicking it around and I was working with Metcalf Archaeology, does a lot of work in this area specifically. I mean, we were looking at close to $500,000 just for the cultural work, by far the most labor intensive field work out there. And so that's where Adam kicking up with the Washington office saying, hey, now this is National Monument and we have all this. We've been able to identify that opportunity.
So guys, we have 3 minutes.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Okay, so they are also doing aquatic surveys, some terrestrial surveys, and then funding, implementation funding. I can't speak to this, I'm only in the NEPA, but
Yeah, I think from the forest health and fuels aspects of it, between different funding measures, we've got appropriated dollars and other partnership dollars like Denver Water and others. You know, we feel confident that be able to fund the forest health and fuels piece. And we're continuing to go after funding now this new monument to help improve the recreational experiences. We've received some funding today, you know, as of today, but I still feel confident we'll continue to bring in more money on the recreational side of things, trail reroutes and all of that. So, yeah.
okay. And then the last thing is we have asked for an increase of $381, $381,000 abouts to our contract amendment to cover all of the things that we discussed. Key things being almost 5 times the size project area, really passionate public with expectations on what they want to see, designation of a national monument driving that increase.
So with that said, we've all seen this sheet for several days, so we're good on that. We have a few minutes here, gang. Do you have any questions or comments in the moment that aren't going to take too long? I have a question for sure.
Can I just follow that up with? Staff has a plan, if the council is comfortable with those dollar amounts, which us, the people telling us how much it's gonna cost more. We have a plan for dollars to supplement in 2023. You'll be considering some of those dollars in your 2024 budget.
The entire,
As well as grant applications to the wildfire council, which probably will fund some of this increase.
right, and Summit County potentially?
Well, yes.
Or
Both-
is the fire
specific-
council just?
Yeah, specific dollars that the wildfire council has, and then dollars that the county has that are recommended by the wildfire council.
And some of that county funds is coming to the Forest Service already that I mentioned for the implementation piece, like we already know that, so.
And there is some natural kind of break of when this is due. We're looking over the end of 2023 into almost towards the end of 2024. So with that table that I pulled together, that task 6, drafting the EA, starting about there, that's all 2024 tasks. So it would really be, if there was like a phased, say, hey, this is the total of what we're seeing right now and sort of a phased approach, you know, that's something that I could easily break out.
It's still looking at end of 24 as record of decision.
Yes, decision notice, yep. Right now it's fall.
And theoretically, if we were to pay for all of this upfront, the rest, you think the rest of the project will be able to get funded?
I feel confident on the fuels reduction. I think there's less opportunities for me to pull money on the rec improvements, but I do know that there are some levers there and opportunities. So that will be, I feel, you know, that was a little more touch and go on all the rec improvements. So yeah, I feel pretty good on the where things sit, and we'll continue to push to get this done. This is a priority for priority project for the entire forest. So we'll continue to advocate for those funding dollars. But from the forest health and fuels, yes, for sure. Rec stuff's just a little uncertain. We received about $1 million recently for the rec side to improve potentially what we had in there, like Miners Creek, Zach Stop trailheads, and then this is from a monument perspective, you know, Spruce Creek and McCall. So we just got to figure out how that money kind of fits into this project. So we already started off with a little bit of money.
And you have a bit more time on the recreation side because everything, most of the recreation groups have to follow agreements. So there's a little more time funding side.
And one more little bit of nuance is there's a substantial amount of trail decommissioning that's part of these trail improvements, and that in many cases. We're looking at the potential to roll that into the fuels contract. They will also be decommissioning things like if there's skid trails or, you know, to get mechanical whatever in there, they're required to have that as part of the contract to decommission. And so where it makes sense, which we could probably identify some likely number of miles during this more intensive of the LiDAR site layout design, we can see how much that's a rec project, but it could actually end up getting taken care of with fuels dollars.
Depending on where it's happening, but
Right.
yes. There's some, that will happen.
What are the potential for it not getting?
Which part, a decision issued? Yeah, so a decision issuing the no action alternative. Want to be pre-decisional by speaking out of turn.
Yeah, I mean, I think that I think, I'm gonna say this politically, but I do really truly believe it. I think we heard a lot of great input from the community, but nothing that I don't think we can work through to get to a decision where some work can be completed. I think at the end of the day, people understand the need for fuels work, for health work, but also there's a drive and need to increase the quality of recreation in the backyard, right? And so as a decision maker, I can see that and feel that it would be, you know, I'd have to come up with some, do the analysis, really positive, or, you know, really strong reasons to pick the no alternative and to continue to be managed as it is today. So I think we'll get to a decision that has to.
And then what? After we go through this whole process, and you probably already answered this months ago. But what is the likelihood that a usage limitation comes into a ruling on that, i.e. you can't bike back there anymore?
So there'll
It
be,
adopts the wilderness, if you will, covenants.
yeah, so you know, there'll be a monument plan, which is a public process. We're just starting that process predominantly with 3U tribes. And that will then eventually come into our partnership public process. So that'll be for the public to determine what is the use that continues in that area. I think the public really values continuing to mountain bike and use that area that way, and I think the plan will reflect that. You know, we didn't see a lot of comments outside of local, right? It wasn't during our comment period, we weren't receiving, but you know, we weren't receiving comment letters nationally from other organizations. And so, you know, I think that just speaks to people here that know what they'd like to see in there. And I think those recreational opportunities, they'd like to persist.
And is it typical for the citizens to drive the process, to raise the cost so the government pays for it? Or is this just so unique that it doesn't typically happen this way?
I don't, you know, I think through partnerships to help us complete the NEPA planning side of things. I think we were probably not anticipating all of or some of the.
You got that.
Yeah.
No one but.
Yeah, and so I think, yes, that's really challenging, I think, to say that. I mean, I hate to, you know, this is part, I mean, in my mind, you know, this is where the Top Risk has been a great partner in understanding the value of the natural resources in the backyard, right? And wanting to be part of that. And from the Forest Service perspective, we don't have all of the resources to probably manage it at the level that the community desires. And so, yes, there's a price tag that comes along with that, but I also think there's a heavy benefit that sitting at the table here and really value your guys' opinions and concerns as a partner in this project to be able to make it a project that everyone around this table can stand up there and feel proud of and represent the, you know, the town and people in the town what they want. So if I'm gonna answer your question, because you know, it's tough for me to say, is this a typical process to an expectation on the dollar mark? There are things, you know, we don't typically do, talked about with LiDAR and some of these other pieces. But I do think that given what we've heard and some of the monument concerns, I think it's a little different than we're typically used to.
I'm comfortable justifying it with fire mitigation and eventually some recreational opportunities. I just wanted to ask those questions. I trust your experience. I trust Pete's motivation. I'm good.
Probably more unusual than a national. Yeah, designated.
Yeah,
I did the Vale Booth Creek project, which is in roadless and wilderness, and it didn't have any near the public interest that this one does, and the level, like, we were able to get wilderness treatments put through, you know, and now with this monument, and just because there's such a passionate public that really value and use this area, it's definitely more.
Thank you. Thanks for the work.
Yeah.
The shot is there. He's from the south side.
I think
He got
mine's
his,
up.
he got his.
Some of us chew their food.
Oh.
Mr. Mayor Pro Tem, you are on mic and recording.
Good evening, everybody. It's like to call to order the
Regular.
regular meeting of the Frisco Town Council. Thank you. For August 22nd, 2023, we have the roll call, please.
Harrison.
Here.
Burley.
Here.
Mortensen is absent. Incan.
Here.
Held.
Here.
He is here. He is remote. Script check Adrian. Here. And Halinko. Here.
The next item on the agenda is public comments. Citizens making public comments during public comments or public hearings should state their name and address for the record to be topic specific. Limit comments to no longer than 3 minutes. No council action is taken on public comments. Council will take all public comments under advisement, and if council response is deemed necessary or appropriate, the individual making the comment will receive a formal response from the town at a later date. With that, anyone?
Is the blue chair available?
Anyone?
Where is it?
Entertainment.
Mr. Fallon?
So I will entertain you while you have a chance to eat. Take my time. Dan Fallon, 202 Alpine Drive. And it's good to be back. It's good to see you all again. Thank you for all your wonderful work, your hard work. And I just miss Pete and the PRA, you guys, what a place. It's awesome. Keep it up and good luck in the backyard. I hope that turns out the same way. Anyway, I digress. So thank you for the great conversation today. I was here for the conversation about the deed restriction issue out at Peak One. To be clear, not living out there, I don't have a vested dog in this fight, if you will. My concern and interest here lies primarily with the continued success of that particular neighborhood, but in general, the strategic housing plan. So, and I want to talk a little bit about how I see that neighborhood integrated in the strategic housing plan and why it's important to look at this maybe from a different perspective than I heard mostly dwelled on in today's meeting. So, so first of all, I would say almost irrelevant in the context that was being pursued today is the question of affordability. And I know it came up a lot and then, this goes back years, right? We've been talking about what's affordable forever. And I think you need to set that issue aside when you talk about you talk about how relevant it is to reapproach this deed restriction. So the fundamental basis of the AMI matrix is to demonstrate that any given AMI, it's affordable to people who are already in that or approach that AMI. And we all know this, right? So we don't really want to talk about 160 or 120. What we want to talk about is talk about this a little bit differently. So the idea of delivering affordable units has also evolved since the first deed restrictions were implemented, and many other strategies now exist that are demonstrably more equitable and deliver better potential for upward mobility. And we're going to come back to that word mobility because I think that's really what this hinges on. So, and also size and typology are really now driving factors in delivering affordable units across varied AMI tiers because the work, live, market units are proliferating. And that seems to be, at least in my limited experience, a configuration that serves a broad segment of the community. And again, the typology and the size drives the pricing. And that way you're building units to attract a certain type of demographic of your workforce. Okay. So, so in my mind, let's discount affordability when it comes to talking about what's going on out there. Let's talk about the question that came up today was one of contractual obligation. And some comments here, I would say, what is the town's role here? For whose benefit should this agreement operate? As the fundamental assumptions that underpin the mechanisms in the contract are demonstrated to be flawed, and I believe we could probably agree that they are to some degree. Maybe agree to disagree, but I think the group that was representative today is demonstrating that there are some issues at least. What obligation does the town have to address the resulting grievances? Does the town acknowledge
Does the town acknowledge the social contract inherent in these original agreements? Have the applicants upheld their end of the bargain? They've been on town boards, they've served on community committees, kids are in school. When I was sitting in the meetings in 2006, 2007, and everything that we talked about, what would make this neighborhood a success really has been manifest basically just by looking at the board that's right here. I mean, it's an incredible success, and one that if we could replicate in so many ways, we should wherever we can. I would say that the apparent success of the neighborhood, when evaluated by just about any criteria, does it support the continuation of the original product mix? And that was something that was brought up in today's presentation. Yes, the town obtains less expensive units, but stands to lose the much lauded diversity delivered by the original formula. I think the town standing by and reaping this perceived benefit of devaluation at the expense of the long-term residents of the neighborhood is an abrogation of this social contract. The folks in this neighborhood deserve this to be reconciled.
Minute and a half, Dan.
Okay. So when this comes to the strategic housing plan, so finally, at the end of the conversation today, I think you arrived at what I would call the crux of the biscuit. How does one evaluate the success of the Pequot neighborhood with regards to how this development is integrated into the strategic housing plan? It is obviously not about affordability. That is baked into the AMI tiers. It is about mobility. People need to move through these neighborhoods and not retire into them. If the incentive to do this is to amend the mechanism in the existing restriction, and we could talk about the 2019 restriction for now, then do this. For example, maybe you change 3%, pick a number that delivers you more closely to that whatever that AMI tier valuation is, that's the goal, 4%, 5%, 6%, it doesn't matter. You could change that, keep the rest of the 2019 valuation the same, Center for QCIs, the other things that help build you to that number, all right? That's a completely arbitrary number anyway. I think somebody spun a wheel in 2006 and said, let's start with 2, why not? See if it works. But it's outdated, and that reality is far away at this point. So the big thing is that this costs the town no money. This would not cost us a dime except for Thad's time to change the wording. We're spending $750,000 to obtain workforce units down the street. So don't focus on the windfall. That's misplaced. I really believe this is truly a not seeing the forest for the trees situation. Focus on the role this incredible neighborhood plays in developing a sustainable community. Okay, so focus on the plan, not on the people. All right.
Thanks, Dan.
Good to see you back. Good to see, yeah.
Not a lot of shenanigans
Yeah, not tonight.
Anyone else wanting to make public comment in the audience or online?
I know, we can't.
Nope.
I think it's just off.
With no other public comments, we'll move on to people or mayor and council come next. Let's do that first.
Council comments.
I do have a quick one. I just want to, and I sent that what I'm going to call a thank you note. When we did our STR regulations, they were well thought out. We had intentions that drew us back from. And no promises for what may happen tomorrow. But while I wish the county best of luck in the litigation on STRs, I think we dodged it by listening to our attorney. So I'm glad we're in a better place.
Right.
But thank you, Thad.
Thank you
Thank
to
you.
Jeff and Public Works for our friend at Prospect Point who came and talked about the flooding issues that they were having. The rain stopped. Good job. But yeah, no, thank you for helping them out.
I wanted to say that, just wanted to say how pumped I am about the mural project on Main Street. It has definitely created a buzz, and it's created all kinds of cool emotions and feelings, and people walking up and down Main Street. Each and every one of them looks great. So thanks so much for helping us get that rolling.
I just wanted to acknowledge the great loss that Colorado and Summit County in particular felt a week and a half ago. when John Fielder passed away. He was an incredible advocate for the environment. He was the Colorado photographer. Sorry to all the other ones, but he was. And he was just a really great human being. And I personally mourn the loss of him, and I think that our whole community does. And so I just wanted to acknowledge that loss.
And I'll just wanted to say that I've been working on some events around the community and seeing Tom's crew with Frisco PD working with other law enforcement agencies, really showing a really unified collaborative effort, which has been great to see in the community. And Jeff, granted, I mean, it looks great. Thanks. Yep, for getting that out there. And the guys right now on Summit Boulevard, to your point, they're getting there, eh? Yeah. Right. And then don't forget, we've got some really great trails out on the peninsula. If you haven't been out there lately, I'm still waiting for the ultimate one to open up, but it's coming. And with that, Tom, you got some updates?
Speaking of the PRA, we've got the high school mountain bike championships coming this weekend. So that's exciting. Another follow-up for Jeff and his public works folks, the solar project on their building is now metered, running. So whatever you did with Excel to make that happen.
We've saved 10 trees. And we've saved 1,293 pounds of carbon emissions just the day alone.
Burning.
I want to acknowledge the staff that, and this is a lot of finance and planning that have been working with NHP to make deadlines on grant applications, letters of intent for different programs at OEDIT. And acknowledge the NHP staff too, who have been working closely with us. There's just been a whole lot going on over the last 3 or 4 weeks. And it's taken a lot of work and a lot of coordination meetings to make that happen. And so hopefully that's going to result in part of their financing, which will help get these projects off the ground. And then meeting at the end of this week. I think I'm the only one going, unless I don't know if anybody else is going. But I'll report back at the next meeting. Oh, it's almost my 1-year anniversary. Since there's a cast meeting coming.
That's right. That's right.
Very happy to be here still.
Great, thanks for the updates, Tom. And then with that, we move on to the consent agenda.
Mr. Mayor, Pro Tem, I move the approval of the consent agenda.
There's been a motion to approve the consent agenda. Do we have a second?
Second.
Motion's been seconded. Please call the question.
Watson is absent. Skripchek, Adrian? Yes. Aronson?
Yes.
Burley?
Yes.
Held?
Yes.
I heard a yes. Held, or sorry, Halenko? Yes. Incan?
Yes. The question's been called and passed. With that, we're going to move straight into old business. Agenda item number 5. Second reading of ordinance 23-15, an ordinance authorizing an amendment to the development agreement between the town of Frisco and the NHP Foundation dated as of May 23rd, 2023. In order to add certain real property to the legal description of the real property that is subject to the long-term ground lease from the town to the NHP Foundation. I think it's going to be Thad.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Mayor. I gave a brief presentation at the last meeting. NHP representative also gave a brief presentation, so I think everyone is aware of the drivers or the reasons for this amendment, having to do primarily with reconfiguration of parking and an attendant increase in the number of units. There were also minor changes to the agreement, rather technical changes to the default provisions. It was approved by all members present on first reading. It has not changed since first reading. And with that, I'm happy to take any questions.
Any questions for Thad? No questions for Thad? Any public comment? No public comment, back to council, and have an emotion.
Okay. Oh, my goodness.
Yes. Well,
Yeah, I'm gonna go, but I don't want to sound that loud. I move that we approve on second reading ordinance 23-15.
second. I'm reading the next one. The motion has been brought in, motion's been made and seconded. Please call the question.
Incan,
Yes.
Mortensen is absent, Scripcheck, Adrian. Yes. Aronson,
Yes.
Burley,
Yes.
Held,
Yes.
that was a yes, and Hlenko.
Yes.
Motion's been made and passed, and then with that, we can move on to agenda item number 6. Resolution 23-20, a resolution amending the Frisco Housing Helps Program. Yep, it continued from the August 8th meeting.
I was going to refrain from a presentation because you saw the presentation at the last meeting. Per your direction, staff removed the language in option 6 of resolution 2320. So you saw a modification removing that language that we were directed to do, which we agreed with. And now, if you have any questions, I'm happy to answer them.
Any questions here? No? Any public comment? No public comment. Any further discussion?
Mr. Mayor Pro Tem, I move that we approve resolution 2320 tonight.
Resolution's been made and seconded for resolution 2320. Please call the question.
Hlenko. Yes. Incan,
Yes.
Mortensen is absent, Scripcheck, Adrian.
Yes.
Aronson,
Yes.
Burley.
Yes.
Held.
Yes.
Motion's been made. The question's been called. The motion has passed. And with that,
Move we adjourn.
we don't have any more items. There's been a motion to adjourn.
Second.
Second. We're adjourned.
Boom, boom, boom.
Thank you.
Almost missed it.